We're live on our radio frequencies on QTV, on Facebook and YouTube. Please follow us at Q95 FM Radio. Share the live, like our pages. The on your phone numbers are on our homepage of our website at www.q95da.com. Be sure to get the latest breaking news and reviews on Q95 because you know it's true if you hear it on Q. We continue to revive the spirit of graciousness, of love and peace, prosperity and unity among our Kalinago and Afro-Caribbean brothers and sisters. It is our 15th Global View on Q show for 2024, and we continue to engage with you, our Q family listeners and friends of Dominica worldwide on live radio at www.q95da.com, on Facebook, on YouTube at Q95 FM Radio, and our distinguished guests tonight are all members of the Electoral Reform Coalition. Mr. Severin McKenzie is here with us, DFP leader Bernard Ito. I'm not sure if he's here yet, but he's supposed to be with us live in the studio at Q95 tonight. Hurtault Deputy Leader, Attorney Ronald Charles is with us. NJAM President Ken Vital is also here. ERC Chairman Johnson Boston is here. DFB Inc. President Mr. Daryl Bobb is supposed to be with us a little later. We hope that he will join us. I have not seen him yet. Rosie Sparks President Miss Rosie Felix is not here with us tonight. She was expected to be here, but I'm not sure that she will make it for good reason. ERC Secretary Mr. Nicholas George and the CCM President Mr. Washbourne Cuffy, they're all with us here tonight. So we have a full house of distinguished guests tonight on the Global View on Q. So a very, very warm welcome to you, distinguished gentlemen, illustrious sons and daughters of Dominica. Well, not daughters because we don't have Rosie with us tonight. But tonight it is not just about accepting any mediocre electoral reform, because it is about electoral reforms, but it's about getting the right reforms right now, after fighting for it from 2008, and in some cases even before that, since that famous or infamous email allegedly caused political interference that stalled the ongoing process in midstream. So tonight it's all about the state of progress right now in securing reform of Dominica's electoral and campaign finance laws and regulations, after the Prime Minister stated recently that he plans to make public select aspects of the reforms that he hopes to table in Parliament before the end of this fiscal year, and he promised to provide the funds for implementing them in the 2024-2025 national budget, which is expected to be approved in Parliament by June 30, 2024. But we'll also look at the correlated state of governance in Dominica, the state of Dominica's economy in light of the most recent IMF report on the situation in Dominica's economy. I will go directly to a few talking points for starters, and I will leave the substantive details of these and other talking points to you, my learned colleagues on the panel tonight, and to you, our callers and viewers. I will simply take a few minutes to set up the framework for discussion tonight. So please take some notes, guys, if you need to, so you can come back and maybe address some of the things that I might mention if you choose to. So I will ask my guests tonight to show the difference between a one-man dictatorship and a functioning democracy that is based on free and fair elections on a level playing field, and to show the international collateral damage that can result from the failure to implement genuine electoral reforms. I will put a few of these questions to my guests and get their response as to some of the things that reformed electoral and campaign finance laws and regulations are meant to prevent, such as rogue diplomats and the recent harsh British response whereby ordinary Dominicans must now pay for visas to visit the UK, the tarnishing of Dominica's reputation by the likes of Maduki and Corallo and Paris and Montferrat, Nazi ambassador, Lapsenk, and others. How do we rescue our suffering Dominican brothers and sisters? Are there any rules currently governing Dominica's civil service? We need to look at that very closely because we do have laws. The silence of the chief, the police chief, the police force, and the criminal investigation department, CID, the audit department, the integrity in public office, the financial crimes unit, the financial intelligence unit, the People's Attorney General, all of the pillars of democracy. Why are they so silent? We're not hearing from them. Is there any remaining function in public institutions in Dominica? If the police will not stop bold-faced thievery, is it left then to action by the people's power? So electoral and campaign finance reform and free and fair elections have consequences and are meant to provide good and accountable governance that forestalls hotel deals whereby millions of CBI dollars find their way to private bank accounts before hotels see one guest, or even before the hotel itself, the front gate of that hotel is open. This is also going to help prevent Dominica's U.S. ambassador from taking hotel owners to court to claim multi-million-dollar shares of the loot on the CBI program and preventing a carefully handpicked cohorts from non-stop stealing and kicking back millions through revolving doors, and from funding lavish U.S. multi-million-dollar general election campaigns of one political party that may not have raised one single dollar of its own. So what crimes have our diaspora intellectuals, leaders, and experienced and qualified experts committed that they are excluded and threatened and arrested on unprosecutable bogus charges and called enemies of the state, telling people to throw hot water on their fellow Dominicans? Some people are now afraid to be even on a panel discussion, in a debate, or even to write an article in defense of their democracy. As you know, free and fair elections and democracy are beyond partisanship. The cause of nation building is beyond partisan politics. It's about the quality of our service and regaining the soul of our nation. Sitting on the fence and hiding in the shadows can no longer be a full-time pursuit. While wondering why our island is decaying in this kingdom of fear and decadence, we must each contribute to the nation building and not expect others to do so for us. What we will not do for ourselves, and don't expect any other country to build water for us. If we do not get up and start building our own water, our small nature island boat will sink in an abyss of inequity, just like Haiti. So this fight to get the right reforms is imperative. All right, my distinguished guests tonight, they will share their views on these and other issues and help all of our fellow Dominicans decide on actions for the way forward to secure free and fair elections, which will give us good, accountable, and transparent government and return us on the path of respect and democracy. They will share their views as to how reform of our electoral and campaign laws and regulations will help to stop leaders and their rich foreign friends from getting richer while ordinary Dominicans get poorer. We heard today about two contractors who done their work and they cannot get paid. A foreign contractor is refusing to pay them from what we understand. That is what they allege. We hope that this will prevent our public service officers from being abused by bias and poor salaries, to protect our police service from being abused by corruption and mismanagement and being poorly paid. While some close to the regime get richer and richer, some get 50% increases in their salaries, some get 30 and 20, while the poor public servants get very little. Hopefully, this will arrest the growing incidence of the physical and sexual violation of our children and the destruction of our environment by foreign construction companies that violate our environmental planning and procurement laws. Put an end to growing food insecurity, which is a direct result of the deliberate killing of our agriculture and our manufacturing for years. Ensure that the CBI program is brought under proper control, the funds returned to the Treasury and used to rebuild and transform the structure of our industries and our economy. As 45 years post-political independence and self-rule, Dominica now has less manufacturing capacity than existed at independence in 1978. Isn't that remarkable? Stop the alarming decline in the quality of our healthcare and in basic supplies and services that are lacking at our clinics and at our main hospital, to end the domination of the economy by foreign interests and construction firms while making a mockery of our procurement laws. Put the brakes on young people having to flee their country because the poor economy gives them little hope, as the overall decline of the economy is clearly evident all around us, and Dominica is collapsing every day in every way under the policies of the current regime in office. To help lay out and design a new direction for the economy and the society based on the solid foundations of major pillars like agriculture, manufacturing, processing, tourism, or natural products, and the fast-growing global industries, knowledge industries, with the support of our democratic allies. No decent nation or groups of nations take our country seriously at the moment. Many see a continuation of in-your-face kleptocracy. I've always expressed the view that no government should stay in power for too long, as power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So it is high time for a change in government to restore democracy and bring back hope to our youth. We will also look forward to even more concrete suggestions as to forward actions that patriots may wish to consider and how they can play a meaningful role in securing appropriate reform of Dominica's electoral and campaign finance laws and regulations in order to secure free and fair elections. So tonight, I trust that my distinguished guests will make suggestions as to where Dominica should go from here to see native Dominicans prosper, rather than continue to see more and more land grabbing by foreign nationals, millions of dollars being sent out of the country by foreign contractors and workers, while Dominican entrepreneurs and our very talented youth are displaced and losing their heritage as they stand aside and look at money simply passing them by and going away. We will examine why it is imperative that we embrace national unity again, national unity, all hands on the same deck to secure good caring governance in our nature isle and enable us to make ourselves truly economically independent in a democratic environment, as we see Dominicans now feeling a really painful pinch in their pockets. There's no question about that. So my distinguished guests, and you, our cherished listeners, viewers, and callers from at home, in Dominica, in the region, and globally, will call and help us expand and broaden the dialogue and opine on the merits and demerits of what we are witnessing in Dominica today in comparison to what transpired some years ago in Dominica as a whole. So we invite you, our Q family, friends, and of Dominica, to stay with us on all radio, television frequencies in Dominica, on our live stream on the internet at www.q95da.com, Facebook and YouTube platforms, and have your say as you do every Tuesday with me, Mr. G, on the Global View on Q, only on Q95, the big station. Our usual huge shout out, hugs, love, appreciation, and a big thank you to our healthcare providers, frontline workers, police and fire officers, teachers, doctors, nurses, and public and private sector patriots at home and abroad. We welcome each and every Dominican and friend of Dominic to the Global View on Q. We embrace you wherever you are tonight, in every nook and cranny, in every village, in every community at home in Dominica, in the region, and globally. Thank you, Sherwin, as usual, for keeping us on the air. Thank you, Lambi. You're not here tonight, but on the console tonight, we have Bosso. Everybody knows Johnson, Boston. We like to call him Bosso. On the console, directing the telephone traffic tonight. We will take your calls a bit later. The people's voice is always a priority on the Global View on Q. So call us anytime during the program, and Bosso will take your calls. He will signal us whenever he calls. So let's get started, gentlemen. I go first to ERC Chairman, Mr. Washbourne Cuffy, for the first word in his brief 5 opening remarks to get the ball rolling in our conversation tonight. Our other panelists will do the same thereafter, and then we'll all have a great Dominican family conversation and engagement, hopefully learn lessons from our extraordinary past accomplishments, with a focus on the state of the progress in securing the appropriate reforms of Dominica's electoral and campaign finance laws and regulations, the state of governance in Dominica, the state of democracy in Dominica, the state of our economy, in light of the most recent IMF report on the situation in our economy. I'm sure that we will all also reference the recent recommendations of this illustrious Justice Williams as regards Dominica's justice system, and the statement, of course, of the CCJ on tainted elections, prime ministerial democracies compared to parliamentary democracies. This will hopefully inspire us all to translate our great historical, economic, political, social, and cultural experience into taking meaningful actions now for the future prosperity of our beloved people, our communities, our youth, our homeland Dominica as a whole, and help us set the path to a more meaningful future for upcoming younger generations. So now I now circle back to you, Mr. Washbourne Cuffy, for your 5-minute opening remarks. Please unmute your mic and let's get going.
Yes, thank you, Sheridan, and good evening to all our listeners. It's my pleasure to be part of this esteemed panel to discuss this electoral business that reform that we have been pursuing for a very long time. It's my pleasure to, and let me, a slight correction, Mr. Sheridan, I'm the president of the Concerned Citizens Movement, but as far as the Electoral Reform Coalition is concerned, I'm the PRO, so I'm here in my capacity as the Public Relations Officer of the Electoral Reform Coalition.
And thank you,
And
thank you so much for that correction, Washby.
Yes, and since we are generally we are a coalition grouping tonight, we wish to start off by a recent release from the coalition yesterday. I went out yesterday with regards to the Electoral Reform Coalition. So that basically would provide an update in terms of where we are as the electoral reform grouping with regards to the electoral reform process. So I will quickly just read through this press release. It says here that the Electoral Reform Coalition notes with keen interest the recent announcement by Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit that the revised electoral legislation will be presented to Parliament before the next budget debate. The ERC, however, remains concerned about the statements of the Prime Minister, which tend to threaten the Dominican population into accepting what appears to be his legislation prepared by his team of experts, led by the Attorney General, while the identity of his electoral reform legislation team is yet to be revealed to the citizenry. Now that the electoral reform legislation has entered the critical phase of being prepared for parliamentary debate, Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit must recognize that his deceptive involvement in the matter demonstrates a blatant situation of conflict of interest. To build the citizenry's confidence in this electoral reform process, the Prime Minister should immediately recuse himself from the process and allow the Office of the Attorney General, supported by a grouping of professional experts, the responsibility to proceed with the preparation of the revised electoral legislation. After more than 15 years of manipulating the electoral process to ensure the Dominica Labour Party victory at the polls in 5 general election cycles, broken promises of electoral reform to the population, denying the Electoral Commission the necessary resources to execute its constitutional responsibility, using the Attorney General as a spokesperson for the Dominica Labour Party, and dissolving Parliament to call a snap election the very day that Sir Dennis Byron submitted his report and draft legislation on November 6, 2022, Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit has demonstrated bad faith, total disrespect to the Dominican people, and has proven himself not to be trustworthy, neither honest nor sincere. Recent developments in Russia should be a glaring example of how fragile democracy can be when an authoritarian leader decides to take advantage of the population through intimidation. The Electoral Reform Coalition has decided to intensify its efforts to ensure that the Commonwealth of Dominica receives the type of electoral legislation it deserves to guarantee free and fair elections for the present and future generations. The Electoral Reform Coalition has requested consultative meetings with the Prime Minister, the Electoral Commission, and the President of the Commonwealth of Dominica to discuss the way forward for the electoral reform process. The Prime Minister responded by requesting a change of date from the proposed February 15th date, but is yet to confirm a new date. The Electoral Commission has not responded, and the President has scheduled the meeting with the ERC for April 22nd, 2024. Meanwhile, the Electoral Reform Coalition appeals to all sectors of the Dominican society to give special attention to the electoral reform process and demand that the vexing issues that have plagued Dominica's democracy are addressed and resolved in the proposed electoral legislation. Any attempt by the Prime Minister to proceed to Parliament with flawed electoral legislation is unacceptable and must be vehemently resisted, despite the threats he has issued against the populists. The Electoral Reform Coalition calls on Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit to, one, immediately make public the composition of the so-called team of experts who are preparing the revised electoral legislation and broaden its composition to reflect the views of all sides of the political spectrum. We are essentially requesting for a more democratic process in that regard. Allow representatives of the opposition and civil society to be part of the review committee. Recuse himself and all party operatives from the electoral process. 4, allow the Office of the Attorney General, supported by professionals and experts within the society, to guide the electoral review process independently. And 5, allow for an uncontaminated consultative process of the electoral legislation, free from the political circus witnessed by the Labour Party consultations of August 2023. Electoral legislation is for Dominica and Dominicans, free from political party influences. All efforts must therefore be made to prevent Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit from using the electoral process to perpetuate his grip on power and usurping the will of the people to elect a government of their choice. The ERC takes this opportunity to request the Dominican citizenry to continue to be vigilant and steadfast in the struggle and resistance for ensuring comprehensive electoral reform. Becomes a reality in the Commonwealth of Dominica. This was a press statement issued yesterday from the Electoral Reform Coalition, which essentially provides an update in terms of where we are as the Electoral Reform Coalition with regards to the process, and taking into consideration recent utterances from the Prime Minister on that matter. So I will rest here for now, and I'm sure that News will provide some form of background and even maybe some talking points as regards to our program this evening. So this is my opening remarks to the panel this evening.
Thank you, Washby. And I'm pretty sure that the level of substance in that release will inform some of that discussion we have tonight. And some of that detail will surface, and I'm sure some of the resolve of the members of the groups that are affiliated with the Electoral Reform Coalition will come through. And certainly we all look forward to what happens in the coming days, because certainly we know that the government has said that they're going to put out something within, it sounds to me like within days now, because some 2 weeks ago, we heard the Prime Minister say that he was going to release this thing, this 2 weeks from then. And I think it may be past 2 weeks now. So hopefully this might come up anytime, and you, the members of the ERC, hopefully get a chance to look at this and spend a few days discussing it and taking your time and examine it to ensure that it reflects some of the things that you have just said here tonight, some of the things that you have been requesting for quite some time. You participated in national consultations, made your requests known. So let us hope that those areas that the Prime Minister and his government have selected, because he said it's only a few areas he has selected to be taken to Parliament now. So let's hope that it reflects some of what you wish. I want to go to our next panelist. I was hoping to go to Mr. Daryl Bobb, and I see Daryl Bobb is with us now. So Daryl is the president of the DBF Inc., Dominica Business Forum Inc. Daryl, if you could unmute, yes, and if you could join us, we really look forward to hearing your contribution to the discussion here tonight. Welcome, Daryl.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Mr.
My name is just Gregor.
Gregor. Good
All right,
evening, Mr. Gregor. Let me just introduce the DBF briefly, and so that I may run to another meeting that's waiting on me. The Dominica Business Forum Inc. was established in December 2012 through a memorandum of understanding signed by 10 private sector organizations for the following purpose: to establish a platform to strengthen the representation and articulation of the interests of Dominica business community and matters connected thereto. Establish guidelines for collaboration between the parties in pursuing their respective mandates as the consolidated mechanism, institution, think tank, and voice of the private sector on matters of micro and macro importance to business and civil society, and to exist alongside the representative member associations. The Dominica Business Forum Inc. is registered as a non-profit business organization under the Companies Act of the Commonwealth of Dominica. Since January 2019, in the aftermath of protest actions by civil society organizations for electoral reform, which resulted in confrontation with the police and the use of tear gas against protesters, the Dominica Business Forum Inc. has been engaged in numerous activities towards securing the necessary changes to the existing electoral legislation in the Commonwealth of Dominica. Some of those initiatives include the formation of the Electoral Reform Group, which consisted of the private sector, trade unions, church and other civil society organizations, which prepared a comprehensive report with recommendations on electoral reform actions that were necessary prior to the 2019 general elections. Subsequently, the DBF Inc. engaged representatives of the OAS, CARICOM, and Commonwealth Secretariat in pursuing an amicable result in the pursuance of electoral reform. Recognizing that improvements to the electoral legislation is the responsibility of every Dominican citizen, and that it should be influenced to the advantage of any political parties in office or in opposition. When the Prime Minister of Dominica engaged Sir Dennis Byron to undertake the review of Dominica's electoral reform laws, the DBF Inc., though expressing concerns about the authority of the Prime Minister to initiate such a process instead of the duly instituted Electoral Commission, recognized the authority of the state and immediately engaged Sir Byron in numerous private consultations and in the only public consultations held with him during Sir Byron's consultancy. And most recently, after his report and draft legislation was submitted to the Prime Minister and to the opposition parties. The DBF Inc. extended invitations to all political parties, parliamentarians, the Attorney General, the members of the Electoral Commission, civil society organizations, and the public to participate in these consultations. Unfortunately, none of the state initiatives, or institutions rather, participated in these consultations. But this did not deter the DBF Inc. from engaging the public and those institutions who were interested in reviewing the draft legislation submitted by Sir Dennis Byron, and arrived at some level of consensus on amendments to the draft legislation submitted. To achieve the overarching goals of free and fair elections that would preserve the Commonwealth of Dominica's constitutional right to choose its government, and even more importantly, to preserve the rule of law in Dominica, the Dominica Business Forum Inc., in collaboration with the organizations and individuals who participated in the review process at the National Consultation on August 3rd, 2023, at which Sir Dennis Byron made a presentation, proposes the following. The voters list should be cleansed annually, not merely of deceased persons, but also of anyone who has not been ordinarily resident in Dominica for at least 5 years. Unless otherwise provided, the right to vote is limited to a citizen of Dominica of 18 years or older who is ordinarily resident in Dominica at the time of the calling of an election. For the purpose of this legislation, the definition of ordinarily resident is as follows. Ordinarily resident means a regular and habitual mode of life in Dominica, as opposed to a temporary sojourn, vacation, visit, or transitory presence. Does not include the provisions including Commonwealth citizens, which remain unchanged. There shall be no overseas registrations of voters. However, confirmation of overseas voters should be done on a thorough basis with the production of a government-issued identification card or passport by the voter. The Electoral Commission shall have the authority to remove from the voters list the names of all persons who have not resided in Dominica for a minimum of 5 years. Dominica or Dominicans who have ordinarily resided or resident overseas, who are 18 years or older, can vote in 2 virtual constituencies to elect representatives who would represent the interests of Dominicans abroad. This provision would involve a constitutional change. On the day of elections, it is an offense for an elections officer to ask a voter for his or her ballot before the voter places the ballot into a ballot box. General elections shall be held on a fixed date every 5 years. These provisions would involve constitutional change. The Constitution should provide for a hybrid system of first past the post and one of proportional representation as a counterweight against the concentration of an abuse of power by a prime minister and his or her party. A similar constitutional change was recommended by the Honorable Justice Telford Georges in his 1999 constitutional report. There shall be fixed limits on campaign spending, not merely during a reporting period, but also during the 6-month period preceding such a period. Spending in each constituency by a candidate or political party is limited to $100 per person living in that constituency, subject to negotiations. The breach of any provision of the legislation governing elections in Dominica is punishable by a fine, custody, or in appropriate circumstances, disqualification from contesting future elections. Gentlemen, we have a list of 26 items. I just read 11 of them, and in the interest of time and this exercise, I would like to stop here and allow the other members on the panel to participate. We will share this presentation with you that you may go through it, and would hope that it would strengthen your presentations as well moving forward. Thank you so much, Daryl, Bobb, DBF.
Thank you, Daryl. I'm really looking forward to hearing the rest of the recommendations that will come through the other members of the panel. Certainly, it appears to me that from what you've said, the recommendations of the DBF appear to be in sync with the recommendations of the other members of the group, certainly from what was read by Washby. And so really, I'm looking forward to hearing the rest of the recommendations, to hope to hear the resolve from all of the members of this panel as to what their organizations are prepared to do when they receive this document from the government, in terms of what the government plans to take to the parliament, what it is that you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and then what resolve you're going to have to undertake in order to ensure that the recommendations that you're speaking about here tonight are incorporated into the laws, into the legislation that is going to be tabled in Parliament. So let me go now to, and thank you, Daryl. You can mute your mic.
Thank you.
Now, Sebs, I want to go to Mr. Severin McKenzie, because Sebs, I think you've been involved in this thing from day one, as I can recall. And really and truly, I really want to concentrate tonight on getting results. In other words, what it is that can be done by these organizations with the help of the people of Dominica to get the result that we want for the appropriate the reform of the electoral laws and campaign finance laws and regulations, in order for Dominica to be able to have free and fair election, a level playing field. So, Sebs, I want to introduce you now. Come to Mike, and let's get your contribution to the discussion.
Okay, good evening, Mr. G.
Good evening, Sebs.
And all the other panelists on the program this evening, and I hope I can make sense with my little 2 cents that I have.
That's 2 cents. That's 2 cents more than I have, you know.
I know you're a fellow with Penny Hip. You used to deal with Penny Hip, but that was in the past old days when Mr. G. Man.
No, that's farthing. Farthing
used to deal with. You see that in Penny Hip, you are above my pay grade.
I'll refer you to Nicholas Judge for that.
Yes, yeah, it's a long time. I think the struggle has been a long one for electoral reform in Dominica. But I believe that we are at a stage right now where Dominicans can either get the electoral reform legislation that they want and deserve, or it can pass them by, and the status and the modus operandi, the status quo, continues. I think we have come a very long way to where we are today, to the point where the powers that be are talking about going to Parliament with the legislation. But my concern personally is that as citizens of a country, how can a government go to Parliament with legislation governing the electoral laws of the country without consultation or the population saying it? And this is where I think we in the Electoral Reform Coalition are. Because it is I think the length of time that the struggle has taken to get us to this point, a lot of people have given up. And a number of people are very pessimistic that Dominica will ever have electoral reform, which is a very sad situation, basically, really, because I think that people should realize that the electoral laws of any country is what determines their very existence. You know, it is the electoral laws that allow governments to be in place and in power and politicians to rule. And if you do not have the mechanisms in place for free and fair elections where people can elect their governments without intimidation in a fair, free and fair environment, then we are definitely heading the wrong way. And to be honest, my only interest at this time, as I approach my twilight years, is to ensure that if the Heavenly Father allows me a few more years on this rock of ours, that I can do it in a safe environment that is free and fair. I have had my own share of political victimization, economic victimization, and a number of different things. So I know what it is when you have a government on your back that stifles your right to exist. And it is for this reason, I believe that Dominicans have to decide whether they want a free and fair revised electoral legislation go into Parliament, or if they will allow the Prime Minister, who has the authority over everything in the state. He has authority over the police, he has authority over the Electoral Commission, he has authority over the president, he has authority over the churches, with the exception of a few of the civils, of the public service. So the Prime Minister and the Dominican Labour Party have authority over everything that is happening in this country. And the only leeway that the people of Dominica have right now is to influence the legislation that is being prepared in reviewing the electoral laws of Dominica. So we can either have electoral laws that will satisfy the wishes of the people, or we will be doomed to have the Prime Minister's own electoral laws. And then people will say, oh, get on the streets to protest. But I could tell you, it will be too late. And it is for this reason that at this juncture, where we are right now, we have to do whatever is necessary to make sure that the legislation that goes to Parliament is the legislation that is acceptable to the population. Because if this legislation goes to Parliament and it does not meet the basic requirements of the people, the ayes have it. They have 19 elected parliamentarians, plus 5 senators, plus a speaker, plus an attorney general. So there is absolutely no way that a flawed legislation can go to Parliament and expect it, and for people to expect that it can be fixed, amended, or repaired during the parliamentary debate process. Since it goes to Parliament, this is it, sign it, die. Things finish because the ayes have it. And it is for this reason that all those who have advocated for free and fair elections in Dominica, all those who have advocated for electoral reform since the 2005 elections, when the first diplomatic passport was issued for $500,000, I was told, our electoral process has been going down the drain. And it means that we are close to 20 years in that struggle. So now is the time, and the only humble demand that we are making at this point in time is to tell the Prime Minister that he has all the authority already. So please free up the electoral reform process. Let us know who is that committee of experts that he has reviewing it. Let us see the draft that they are preparing. Get persons from the opposition and civil society involved in the process of preparing the final draft to make sure that some of the vexing issues are addressed in the legislation, and then everybody can be satisfied. Because if this is not done, I do not see Dominica having any level of peace. Mr. G, I think I've made my contribution. I can go home and sleep right now.
No, you can't go home and sleep right now. You're a young fella. No matter what you said, I think you really made a false statement when you talk about your twilight years and all of that. You're just in the prime of your life. You're just getting started. Now, you made a few points, Sebs, and I want to go over to Bernard because we need to go over to the studio with Bernard now, and then we'll come back to the panelists that are online. But Severin, Sebs, you made a couple of points. You said the ERC must see and review the draft laws before they're tabled in Parliament. I agree, because the people must see those. You can't just take them and assume that the people agree with everything that is in this draft. You also said that ERC, the people of Dominica, need to influence the draft legislation, right? And demanding that what is in them is what the things that they think appropriate and that we really need, that meets international best practices. And then you said, the question I have was, and as I go to Bernard, I want to ask a question. What is the ERC prepared to do if the government lays flawed, it goes to the Parliament to lay flawed legislation in the Parliament? Because as Sev said, the ayes have it. But the ERC has to have some kind of resolve to do something to prevent that from happening. Especially, we know of the famous 2008 email which is still sitting on the necks of the Electoral Commission, preventing them from breathing, and they're not even willing to answer your letter to have a meeting with them to discuss reform. Unless that email is removed on the necks of the electoral commissioners, it seems as though there is a problem, because it's talking about almost the eternal election winning legacy of the current Prime Minister. Bernard, let me go over to you.
All right. Good evening, Mr. G, and good evening to my fellow panelists, and of course, all our listeners here in Dominica and across the world. I think it might be a bit too early, or maybe a little bit too much for me to express at this point an ERC response to this particular situation developing. We have some meeting plans, and in fact this week, to discuss the ERC's position and the ERC's response and strategies going forward as the Prime Minister presents this legislation. So from a very specific ERC response, I'll hold off on that a bit, and we'll chat more about this, and as developments come along. But from a high level, philosophical position, as it were, in terms of what do we do with this situation that has developed in Dominica over electoral reform generally, and bad governance more broadly. I have expressed this, and I've expressed this before, and so it's no new idea here or revelations. But I really think the answer to electoral reform is, and there's only one answer in my mind, is to replace this government. I think anything short of that will, not, in my opinion, achieve the sort of electoral reform that we expect to happen. I think, I'm at the position, and I think more and more people are getting to that position where we know this government will not deliver anything of value in terms of good governance to this island. I am really getting exasperated, and I'm beyond the point of asking this government to do anything. I mean, this government will not deliver good governance because the incentives are aligned to benefit from bad governance. And so there's a misalignment of incentives between what we wish, to decent people in Dominica, to see our country develop, to see good democracy thrive, and an alignment with what they wish, which is to see a dysfunctional system within whose soil they can thrive and exploit. So I'm not sure that we can rely. In fact, I'm stronger than not sure. I am convinced that we cannot rely on this government to deliver any sort of electoral reform that makes sense. Of course, we will fight the issue. We will lobby for legislation, for good legislation. This is what we're about. This is what we're doing this evening. But I think fundamentally and ultimately, electoral reform will be delivered by a new government, us. We cannot expect anything beyond that to be delivered by this government. It's simply not going to happen. As I said, that's my expectation of what they will deliver in the sense of what do we think is in the legislation. We haven't seen it yet. What do we think it will look like? It will not be good. I guarantee it. It will not be acceptable to Dominicans, because they will pass and intend to pass legislation that is to their advantage, that continues the ability to exploit the weaknesses and the bad aspects of the design of the Westminster model of government. And they fully exploit that. And so I expect them to continue to do so. If I were to predict, I would predict the one thing. There is only one thing that this government wants to do with electoral reform: remove the 5-year requirement that is currently in the law. Everything they have done, every consultation they held, every propaganda machinery and dialogue that they started online and elsewhere has always been focused and targeted on, well, all you don't want people overseas to vote, but it's their right to vote, the democratic right, and blah, 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 a bunch of smoke and mirrors, double talk. And their only intention, and mark my word on this, their only intention in all of this is to remove the last vestige of protection that Dominicans have now within the legislation that says that if you're overseas for more than 5 years, and that can be shown and proven, that your name should be stricken from the list. They want to remove that. That is all this government wants to do. There's nothing else that they wish to do in this legislation. Now they'll come in and they'll throw a few things in, like, okay, here's a voter ID, okay, here's a little thing, here's a little that. But ultimately, their only objective is to remove this last bit of protection. And so I am pretty certain we will not get a legislation we can live with. And as I said, we're not prepared to therefore throw into trouble or say that nothing can be done. That's not what I'm advocating. But I am saying that ultimately, electoral reform, the only way to get the sort of electoral reform that we want is to put our energies and focus into replacing this government so that we can restore the democracy in Dominica, because the restoration of democracy in Dominica will be fought tooth and nail by this government, which means they will fight any reasonable electoral reform tooth and nail. Now they are, in fact, changed tactics. They were dead set against it. They were very obviously fighting it. Now they have changed tactics to be, well, we want electoral reform. But of course, we know it's nonsensical. They are just simply changing costumes to try to bamboozle us. But mark my word, it's simply a costume of embracing it to try to do some judo techniques on the population. But we're not fooled, and we're fully vigilant and aware that that's what's happening. And I hope the Dominican public is aware of that, and as we continue to talk and discuss.
Well, yes, certainly. Before I go over to Kent, who's with us on the panel, I wanted to just reach out to all those wonderful people already with us on Facebook and following us on YouTube as well. I want to reach out to you guys and say hello. We'll come back later on and see if we have a moment to read some of your comments there. But we're delighted to have you with us here tonight on Facebook and on YouTube. I wanted to go over to Kent because Kent, you've heard all the other panelists before. You've heard Bernard now. Bernard is a little concerned about the intent of the government in its first bite at electoral reform. Remember, the Prime Minister told us recently it's only a select few. I think it's about 5 different areas that they're proposing to tackle at this time. And they would not tackle anything that has constitutional implications. But certainly, Bernard didn't really talk about it. I don't know, as you're going to make your contribution, I don't know whether you want to express any concern about the fact that whether or not they might want to tackle the whole question of campaign finance reform. Because it seems to me not only have they been depending on the overseas votes to come in to give them that winning legacy, but they've also been depending on raising a lot of money from very opaque sources that nobody knows about because they don't report on where the money is coming from. But it seems to me there's been a lot of money in those elections, those past few elections. I don't know whether you have some concerns that they may not even want to consider electoral campaign finance reform, Ken. So you can unmute, Ken, so we can hear you.
Okay, thanks, Mr. G, and good evening to everyone. Really nice to be here once again. Can you hear me well? Okay.
We're hearing you very well.
Okay, great. Yes, well, let me just touch on that briefly, and I'll go to something else and come back to it because it has a lot of importance. And in keeping with what Bernard said, clearly, they do not want to give electoral reform, or they want to give, and they have changed their tactics, as he rightly said. And the intention now is to give a reform that suits them. So if you give a reform and you remove the 5-year limit, that's a reform, but it suits them. It's biased towards them continuing to win elections. But that is paired with the fact that they have gotten, as you said, monies from very opaque sources. Chances are part of the billions of dollars that are missing is part of the very monies that they're using to fund elections. They know that. They know that they have a war chest. They will not necessarily bring in that money to help Dominicans, but they would definitely keep that war chest out there, huge amounts of money, to ensure that they can win elections. So there is no interest for them to do campaign finance reform. I would agree generally, of course, that there are some things that require a change of constitution, and may not be, maybe we cannot deal with it right away, but there are some minimum things that has to be addressed. If you clean the list at the very least, right, a clean voters list and voter ID cards, and maybe 1 or 2 other things, even if they have that watchers out there. And of course, if you deal with the issue of the who can come in, because that has to go with cleaning the list. It has to, if you clean the list, it has to also be paired with the fact that there's a certain requirement to be registered, and the requirement in the law right now should be maintained, all right, or improved. But they would want to say they would improve it in a way that benefits them. So clearly there are some things they won't want to do. Some things they maybe we cannot do because of the changes to the Constitution, but the minimum things that ought to be done are within reach, within grab, and that is what we are asking. And we would have to wait and see what comes out to be able to make a judgment as to whether they have indeed provided a minimum set of reforms that we can live with. So that's why we are patiently waiting, hopefully for this to be shared, the draft legislation to be shared with the public before going to Parliament. But I wanted really to encourage people today and remind them of a few things. That the incumbent government, the government in the 2019 elections, would have lost the elections if they were free and fair elections. I want us never to forget that the majority of Dominicans here, and I would even say the majority of the Dominicans abroad, right, do not want this government in power. But based on those who can vote, based on the 2019 elections, chances are, or I am of the view that the government would not have won the elections. Now, we know that. Many of us know that. And it wasn't because of UWP votes only. It was also Freedom Party votes. It was also votes from independent people. And there were even some Labour votes. All of that together, if it wasn't for the fact that they were importing voters in, then they might have lost. Now, I and you know that. But do you know who else knows that? The Prime Minister also knows that. The current ruling administration, they also know that. And why do we know? Of course we know that they know that, but here are a few simple reasons why we know they know that. Because if they really felt that they would have won freely, fairly, justly, if they really felt so, they would have had no qualms, no issues with giving free and fair elections, because it meant that the majority of the people in Dominica who are able to vote, or legally are able to vote, if they could convince that they could have won that way, then they would go ahead with the reforms. So clearly, he knows he could not have won that way. He knows he would not have won, and it's a clear indication that he knows he would have lost the last elections. Not because of just UWP, but freedom and independence. And that is why it's important for us as a people to continue to come together at such a time as this, on the issue of electoral reform for sure, and on broader issues of good governance. We got to come together because we know what that can do. Now, so if he was convinced that he could have easily walked through and have the favor of the people, and the majority of people in Dominica who are eligible to vote in Dominica would have voted for him, if he was so convinced, he would never have called a start election in 2022. So he knows that. He knows he will lose. So therefore, it is very unlikely, or chances are, he is trying to ensure that he continues to win. He knows he cannot win free and square, right? He knows the issue of electoral reform is before the people. So as Bernard said, he has changed his tactics, and he wants to pretend as if he wants fair and fair elections, but he wants to do those things that will cause him to continue to win unfairly. He wants reforms that will favor the government, that are not free and fair. You see the fair part? He wants that because he is the incumbent, he has a war chest, and that's what he wants. But if we ask the question, and again, while we have a meeting coming up, and we cannot and we shouldn't necessarily prematurely say exactly what can or cannot be done, we've got to wait and see what happens. But we would love to be surprised. We would love to be surprised by the PM or the ruling administration by doing the right thing. Because if you were to do the right thing and bring a minimum set of reforms that are acceptable to the vast majority of people, to fair people, if he were to do that, then everything will be fine. And that's what we are calling for. Have a fair set of reforms that's not in favor of the incumbent government, that is fair, as the word says. And if that's the case, then everything will be fine. So we wait to see that. And we would love to be surprised Surprise me. I'm really waiting for that. But if he does not do that, if he does something that's unjust, if he presents draft legislation that doesn't present a certain minimum number of reforms that will result in fair and fair elections, what must we do? Well, we definitely have to make the government know that we mean business. We, the people, all of us, we have to make the government know that we mean business. And I think we have well started on that process already. A Electoral Reform Commission organized the rally where we were graced with the presence of the senator from Trinidad. That was well attended, and people are listening, and we are energizing people, and we have to continue to rally together. And then there was the meeting on the Ark, where a great number of Dominicans came together. And what was very encouraging to me is that there were a number of young people there. What was also very encouraging is that there were many laborites there as well. So clearly we have to continue the momentum. Then we went on to Grand Bay, and we've got to continue building momentum and continue putting our people in a mood. Now, we'd love to be surprised, but if we are not surprised, we've got to build momentum. Let the government knows we know when this. When we get to our meeting later this week, we will discuss a few things, what can and cannot be done, what should or should not be done. But our people will need to prepare to save our country. But how do we do that? How do we save our country? These are things that we have to discuss in the next few weeks. But certainly an area that I would like to emphasize is that we have to come together as well in prayer and fasting. Now, not many people may understand some of these things, and some people may even ridicule it, but I really don't care because I know who my God is. But it is not just a physical thing. This is a spiritual battle as well. This is a spiritual battle. And there are many of us who have to come on our knees and pray and fast about this. Now, you know something, often when we talk about spiritual things, some people, they think it's spooky and they think it's not about that. But you know something? Some people want us to behave just that way because some persons who on the evil side, and they know exactly what's been done. They know the games that they're playing. They know how they're in bed with the devil. They don't want us to think that's the case. But those of us who don't want to think that, that's fine. I'm not condemning you for that. But I know my God, and I know who I serve. And I want to tell all those in Dominica who don't like injustice and you believe in the same God that I believe, that we have to continue. And I know there are many people who have been on their knees already. And I want to ask you to continue and be patient. But we have to even go on our knees even more in prayer and fasting. But let me just give the political administration a godly warning. And I'm doing that because I know I'm a son of God. And I'm saying to you, not just the Prime Minister, but all those who are surrounding him and enable him, all of those his ministers who, in spite of what you know, you are not guilty, you're not innocent. All of you who decided to run with and for the Prime Minister, even if you knew how corrupt he was, you're complicit in this. And I want to give you a godly warning, almost in the same way that Pharaoh was given a warning by the Lord. I want to warn you. The people have been on their knees. They have been praying. People have been crying because of your injustice. You had many chances, and you have a few more chances to do the right thing when it comes to electoral reform. You have a few more weeks, a few more months maybe, to do the right thing. And I'm giving you a godly warning, because if you do not do the right thing, I am saying to you as a child of God, that it will not be well with you. It will not be well with you. Now, and those of you who are Labour Party stalwarts, and I'm very glad that many are coming on board. And I speak to people, and I know there are those who will not speak because they receive some kind of benefit, or they do not want to lose some kind of benefit. But I've spoken to people, and I know there are those who are dissatisfied and do not happy with what's going on. But to those who are still on the fence and you're still not sure, I want to ask you to reconsider. And some of us, we do not or we support injustice, not because we do not know that it is injustice, but because we simply want to protect something, some benefit or something. But I want to pray God's strength for you to be able to say, you know something, it's high time that I stop supporting what is wrong and I support what is right. I want to tell you to rethink that, because it will come back to hurt you. It will come back to bite you. And I don't want to talk too long again, but I just want to give you 3 instances of how we already see our country is going down a real terrible road. You see what recently happened with the 6 persons, aviators who were deported. I don't want to go through the whole story right now, but some of you would have heard Lennox and others speak about that, and Afi himself speak about that. But when I really think of it, because I remember that was something on a possible business potential Afi was talking to me about some time ago, a couple years ago. But I believe what went on there, without knowing all the details at this point, but knowing the nature of this government and knowing what I myself have suffered from, that is clearly economic terrorism. Now, the question is, who will be next? How far are we going to let them continue in that road? Because it could reach a point where it is so terrible. People will cry much more than they're crying now. What happened with the murder of the proprietor of Grand Colibri? What really happened there? Who was behind it? And why isn't there a greater urgency and sensitivity to really uncover this? Because this could harm us. So the question becomes, what is it that we don't know? And if there is something, my understanding is that this gentleman wasn't necessarily not necessarily, he wasn't a favor of this government. This gentleman may have refused the meeting with the Prime Minister. What will be next? Who will be next? We have to stop this from happening. It's already happening. We have to do everything it takes to stop it from deepening. What happened with the motorbike incident in which resulted in the death of someone caused by the son of this very notorious individual? Who will be next? What will happen when your sons and daughters will be wronged, will be raped, will be beaten, will be murdered by these oligarchs? What will happen? What recourse will you have? You can already see where we're going now. Even you labor rights, who still support because you think you're protecting something now.
So Kent,
till later, and you will say.
Kent, I wanted to sort of answer that question a little bit. I remember what Bernard said. He's answered your question. He said the only way to fix that is to change the government.
Yes.
But of course, we're talking about electoral reform, and we're hoping to get the electoral reform we need so that there can be a level playing field, so that there's a good chance that any political party or group of people can win an election and form a government. I think that is what Bernard is saying to us. But I wanted to go to Nicholas George, and I'm going to go to the attorney, the only attorney among us here. I want to go to him last because I really want to get his views from a legal standpoint. I want to go to Nicholas George, but just before I do, let me just take one of the comments I see from one of the people there on Facebook. I'm just going to take one to see if we can do something with it. Let's see what this one says. This is, well, somebody said Bernard has not mentioned anything about protests. It is summed up by saying that the opposition version of electoral reform can only be realized by the installation of good government. Another comment is that they hope that the DLP would create a level electoral playing field was always a fallacy. The focus has to be on winning the hearts and minds of most Dominicans here and abroad to overcome the DLP election dishonesty, including protest. Now, I refer to that one in particular because when we talk about being surprised, I mean, we all would be extremely surprised if this government now would put reformed laws on the table that would affect their winning legacy, because remember, that is the only reason why this thing has stalled, because they don't want anything that is going to affect the winning legacy. So it might be a little bit much to expect them to do that. So the next question, the next thing that was raised by Kent, he said we must make the government know. I think he said,
Mr. Jim, we are having a call. Can we take a call?
Let's take the call.
Yes, sure. Hello, good evening. Hello, good evening.
Hello, good evening, Dominica. Good evening, St. Joseph.
Good evening.
Good evening, panelists.
Yes.
It's amazing, you know. I listened to you there in St. Thomas, and for the effort I see all you put, the effort I see Salisbury people put, and they pay a price for it. Now we're reaching a point where the nation should come together. That means to say all hands on deck, including the government, taking the people out there who was in the beginning fighting for election reform to come together and put this thing in the right perspective so that we will not delay or will not have argument about the people. Right now, scared, sidelining the people that was really fighting for election reform. I cannot believe all you on the panel tonight, and none of all you not invited to even have an input in the last section that we're supposed to have before it goes to Parliament. So you see, this guy is crooked. This guy not only thief when it comes to Dominica money, but the thief when it comes to even politics and everything else. My brother, we have to vote those guys out. Dominicans, get out of on your show. That's not our word.
Thank you very much.
These guys planning to crook you out. God bless Dominica. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much for those comments. Boss, you have another call?
No, you can go ahead.
Okay, let me just say this to Nicholas George. I agree with the caller, and that is why I said, what is the electoral reform coalition going to do to make the government know that it means business? Because, as Bernard says, we cannot now anticipate what is going to be in that draft legislation that is going to be tabled. But certainly, we know it is not anything that is going to affect the winning legacy of this regime. So Nicholas George, I wanted you to address some of those things because, in fact, it seems to me we have come to a point where this electoral reform coalition groups must make up their mind that legislation that is put out to the public, when it is put out, as limited as it is, because we were told it's only going to cover a few sections, as limited as it is, the electoral reform coalition must demand that there is given sufficient time to study this. And because remember, there's a timeline already put on the table. The Prime Minister said we want to get this thing done before the end of this financial year. That is the end of June, to get the budget approved for implementation of the provisions that is making it into draft legislation. So I think it's essential, and I'm hoping that before we leave here tonight, and when you guys go back and have your discussions, that there will be a resolve and a way of making the government know you mean business, that you are not going to allow legislation that is what you call flawed legislation to be tabled in Parliament. Nicholas George, your comment on some of those.
Thank you, Mr. Gregor. I want to start by saying I endorse the comments of Mr. Bernard Ito and some of those made by Mr. Hurtault a while ago. I want to also say that we must understand that what we're discussing now, the electoral reform legislation, is the second most important piece of legislation for the governance of a country to sustain democracy. The first one is the Constitution. Now, when the Constitution was being prepared, there was a delegation that comprised the government and opposition and civil society. And they traveled all the way to London to negotiate that. That Constitution has not been amended since. Nobody has too much trouble with it. We have some, but we've managed to survive with it. The next one is the electoral reform legislation. And we must remember that, notwithstanding that the Prime Minister has given a timeline, it is not possible. It is impossible for us to have legislation, the electoral reform legislation, as the Prime Minister is talking, before June of this year in Parliament. It's not possible. There are about 6 bits of legislation. There's the House of Assembly Act, and there is the electoral, the Registration of Electors Act. There's a new piece of legislation to do with the composition of an amendment of the Electoral Commission, and there are regulations to each of those acts. All that have to be considered. Now, to issue, and like you said, to issue us with the legislation by when? By Friday? He's issuing us the legislation by Friday, and the 15th of May, he's going to go to Parliament and pass 6 bits of legislation upon the pain of and peril of death, likely, to citizens of Dominica, because that is what the Prime Minister has done. The Prime Minister has illustrated and said clearly that nobody will prevent him from passing the legislation this time. And I will not be tolerating foolishness from anyone when I take this, because I want the legislation. I'm going to have it, and I'm going to have it at the pain of anybody trying to oppose it. And I will not tolerate it. The question I have for the Prime Minister tonight is, what is his threshold of that pain? Mr. Prime Minister Roosevelt Scarrett, what is your threshold? If you know that the legislation you're going to bring is going to see opposition, it's not going to get total agreement, and there is an expectation that there might be protest, is your threshold going to be the death of one person, 2, 3, 4? How many Dominicans would you think that you can kill or cause their death to ensure that you have the legislation passed the way you want it to pass? I want to suggest to you, Prime Minister, that it were better if you listen to the ERC now. Present whatever draft that you have come up with. Present it to us in good faith. Allow a committee, and we've suggested it can be led by the Attorney General. The Attorney General is the legal advisor of the government, of the state, not the Labour Party. And let us have the kind of intellectual discussion that will allow us to come up with legislation that we can be proud of. And we know that the Prime Minister has taken liberties with the truth many, many times. And therefore, like Mr. Ito, I too would be surprised, and you, if the legislation comes to us on Friday. Friday would be the deadline. Okay, he said the second week in April. We are on the 9th of April. So Friday would be the deadline. Does the Prime Minister have the legislation to give us? So I'm going to send out a challenge to the Prime Minister tonight. Prime Minister Roosevelt Scarrett, surprise us and make sure by Monday, 4 o'clock, the legislation is in the hands and delivered to us in a ceremony at the State House, just like you did with this Byron report. That is the first test of credibility. The second one is by Wednesday, meet with the ERC and come to an agreement on who should compose a select committee that would review the legislation that you would have given us on Monday, clause by clause, so that we would get consensus. We're not taking away the right of the executive to take legislation to Parliament. That's not what we're saying. But we're saying that this legislation, because of its importance on the governance of Dominica, it is too important. It is next to the Constitution. In other words, for there to be a president, there must be an election according to our Constitution. And that is the law that allows us to elect a government. For there to be a prime minister, there must be an election, because only an elected member of Parliament can be selected as prime minister. So it is not his law. It is not his law. The law belongs to the state, and he's required to do just that. Allow us to participate in the process, and do not tell us that you're going to pass law in Dominica at the pain and peril of possible loss of life, property, and limb of the people of Dominica. This is a very serious statement and should be investigated. Should be investigated by the police department, The police has investigated lesser statements than these, less critical statements than these. And the Prime Minister has been allowed to carry on with that. You ask, what is the ARC going to do? I think I have tried to answer you. The ARC is saying to the Prime Minister that if he brings legislation that does not have any modicum of consensus in it, we will defend our right to oppose it at the very pains and perils that he has put us at.
Let me thank you for that contribution, Mr. Nicholas George. And I have to tell you that you have a call that you want to take, Bosso?
Yes, I have a call.
Go ahead.
Hello, good evening.
Hi, good evening to you. Good evening to you, Mr. Boston. Good evening to the entire panel. Gentlemen, I've been listening to this program, and it's a very interesting program. And Dominica is at a crossroad. I know you are following what's going on in the United States, where Donald Trump made a statement last week where if he does not get reelected, like there will be bloodshed and stuff like that in America. Hey, this is a case in point in Dominica. This guy that is sitting in the seat of Prime Minister is desperate, and the people of Dominica need to realize right now that they cannot allow Roosevelt Skerrit to decide how we're going to get electoral reform. I mean, I'm not for violence, my brother. I never support violence, but Skerrit have to get to understand what is going on, and we have to let him have a taste of his own medicine. Remember what he did us in 2019, where he brought in RSS to kill us, to tear-gas us. Roosevelt Skerrit, I'm sending that message to you tonight. It's not going to be business as usual, my brother. Enough is enough. We cannot take your brutality again. Dominica was not willed to you by Chichi. Okay? Good night.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Bossa, did you want to take another call before we move on?
No, you can go ahead.
All right. So any call comes in because it's maybe you can give the people the telephone numbers, Bossa, before I move on, so that they can call at any time and you'll just give me a signal. So give out the telephone numbers.
Yes, it's 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, and 616-4257. And those of you calling from overseas, 305-432-9624. These are the numbers here you could call. And as we said, when you call, let's try to be brief and to the point. Thank you very much. Mr. G, go right ahead.
Thank you, boss. So as I go to Ronald, the same Ronald Charles, who's the only attorney with us here tonight, I just wanted to say before I did that I particularly agree with some of the things, most of the things that was said by Nicholas George. And Ronald, because you're the attorney here with us, you're the learning attorney, Nicholas George mentioned something that is very, very important. I addressed it a little earlier on in brief. And then after you, we're going to open the discussion so everybody on the floor will be able to just exchange and dialogue with each other and take the calls and, interact with people on Facebook after you. But Nicholas George is telling us what is likely to happen. Remember, there is a deadline date. June 30th is the deadline date that's the end of the fiscal year. It means that the budget has to take place before that date. We are now in April. If how many bits of legislation provided to the public by the government of Dominica, we don't know when yet. Nicholas is hoping it will be done by Friday. We don't know when yet. But you can tell us, Ronald, because you're an attorney, if you have 5 or 6 bits of legislation, we don't know how many pages of text you're going to have to look at. So we don't know if it's going to be 300 pages in total that we have to look at in small print with a lot of different clauses and so on to look at. Do you think this can be done now within that time frame between now, let us say, and the middle of May, where you can sit down, if the government agrees that is going, which is Nicholas George's recommendation, to establish a joint committee to review that legislation together with the Attorney General and the others, to everybody can make their input into this draft, which is the government is now proposing. This is different from the national consultations that were taking place to arrive at what is going to be in this draft. Now we know what is in draft when we see it. Do you believe that it is going to be feasible for people to review all of these documents within a month and be able to come up with something so that they can give to the government and the electoral commission in time for them then to take a decision whether they're going to accept the newer recommendations and amendments that are being made by the people, and then do it in time to be able to table it in Parliament before the budget so that they can provide for it? Let me hear your thoughts on that, Ronald, because this is where I'm going to in terms of what it is that the ERC would do if they come up with a situation like that.
Good evening to the panelists and good evening to the host, Mr. Gregoire, and to all the people far and wide, Dominicans by and large. It's really an honor to be here. Before I get into the meat of the question as to whether or not there seems to be a secret legislation or what I call electoral capture in the making, before I address that, I would like to go back to your initial opening remarks as the host, and you speak to issues of democracy. And I think that is important. And you also mentioned dictatorship. I think that is important. And you said also there must be a level of critically looking at our justice system, which assists us to grow, which assists us in our daily lives. The issue of electoral reform has been on the table for over 15 years. People must be given a chance to choose the government that they want. And therefore, the due process of law must be embraced by those who have the authority to bring it to Parliament. And to answer some of your questions before I get into my discussion, is that due process that we're speaking of, and I agree with the sentiments that were shared by everybody, there seems to be a notion from the head of government that, hey, Zogabali, Zole election reform, les autres tapés, ça autres tapés, Zogepon. What's to that effect? And I said this for my beautiful elderly people who might be listening. And I say this because there almost seems to be a notion that, hey, my mind is made up, I've gotten my consultants, and we're ready to go. You all want it, we're going to give it to you all. But when you see we're going to proceed with it, no man back. Democracy means rule by the people. Democracy is a system of government in which laws, policies, leadership, and major undertaking of the state or other policy are directly or indirectly decided by the people. That is democracy. And what is the opposite of it? Dictatorship. Dictatorship is a government or a social situation where one person makes all the rules and decisions without the input from anyone else. Dictatorship implies absolute power. And the next question is, what is our judicial or what would our justice system? It's a legal structure or system that is designed to judge in general sense who should be accorded a benefit or burden when the law is applied to person's factual circumstances. What are our factual circumstances? Our factual circumstances is that there has been numerous recommendations. And while I say that, I remembered vividly on the 19th of February 2024, when our political leader, Dr. Thompson Fontaine, made the pronouncement as to what the United Workers' Party continue to embrace and continue to say this is the way forward. And I think everybody have said it, but it's always worth revisiting it. Clear voters list, the issue of residency, voter ID cards, equal access to the state-owned radio station, DBS, campaign financing, which the host and Mr. Vidal have articulated. Because those issues are very important in order that we can embrace the word and the meaning of the word democracy. If we fail to do this, we will be in a problem. The reason why we need electoral reform is because the system that we have now, it's unfair. There are too many loopholes in it. And therefore, we need to make sure that every single Dominican, from the hills of Mondablote to the valley in the Rosa Valley, Sulphur Springs, need to be satisfied that I can deal with those changes that are coming. We cannot afford to get any surprises. Ambush, legislative ambush, I call it. And that is why the law is there. That is why the Constitution is there, to ensure that we are guided by certain principles that persons can feel after they have done something. They feel, well, 11 fellas to play the cricket, 11-11 aside. You know, we lost the 2020 match. It is what it is. Let's move on. But not if you had 3-4 referees or umpires against you, including the third umpire. If we fail to bring in electoral reform, we are telling people this is the only government that we can get. And therefore, because we have more to discuss, let me say the United Workers' Party will not stay silent. Neither we will, how you call this in Creole? Mr. G, I've been on the road today in my usual Tuesday visit to the constituency. And a lot of people say to me, Mr. Charles, sometimes we want to hear the Creole because they understand it's important. So let me go back to your question as to the time. If you say that is the head of government, that you love people, you appreciate them, you give them a sense of belonging, a sense of democracy, and the system is fair, according to Mr. George, according to what news items that were released recently, this period would not embrace due process, which is a fundamental aspect of legislative process or of the legislative process. Now, according to the gentleman and the head of government that we're dealing with, he will say, well, they're asking for reform, we give them reform, now they want more time. 15 years we've been waiting. So it wouldn't kill us to get it right for another 7 or 8 months. It will not kill us because we've been waiting for a long time. And therefore, we need to send a clear message, a clear message, all hands on deck, that this electoral reform draft bill or whatever you want to call it, that is about to hit the people of Dominica must be embraced by every single citizen by majority. And embracing means you're not going to slide in any little legislation to continue your legacy or to remain dominant. It's not going to happen. I think Dominica have a lot of brilliant people, way, way more brilliant than me. And I think when we read it, the answers will be clear moving forward. I don't think nobody is pushing any violence. Nobody is saying to do anything that would create chaos. But when you stand up and you decide you're not moving, it can sometimes be difficult for a bulldozer to push you, especially when you're talking about 70,000 people standing up for their rights, which is the most fundamental right, the right to vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Ronald. As I go to Boss, so really it's my way of saying, okay, once Boss has made his contribution, let's open up. So anybody can jump in and people can call and we can jump in and have a conversation from now to the end of the program. So from Bosso, I mean, Bernard could come in, anybody could come in and let's discuss. But Bosso, I just want to go to you with this. We spoke about the timeline, and it seems to be it's an unreasonable timeline to expect within 4 weeks for anybody, even a lawyer, to be able to go through pages and pages and pages of draft legislation to ensure that some of the things that they recommended, which is best practices, are included in that. And then I believe that the government appears to be taking the position that they are the ones who can summarize what the majority of people in Dominica and what the good minds, the brilliant people, the legal people, the best practices in the region and internationally, they are only the only ones, and a small team is the only one who can come up with this draft. And there is no need, they might be feeling there is no need for all these organizations, the ERC and so on, to really vet this thing. They might be thinking that, you know, hey, we've done this thing, so we now can select what we want from that as best practice, and then tell you that we'll give you a couple of weeks to do this, and then we go to Parliament, whether you like it or not. And if you don't like it, lump it. So, Bosso, your thoughts on that? Because certainly this thing needs to move forward, but it needs to move forward in the appropriate way so that Dominica can in fact get best practices in its legislation.
Mr. G, thank you very much. And let me say good evening to everybody in the panel and those of you listening at home and abroad, and say tonight is a very good discussion on our business, which is electoral reform. And you rightly asked the question that we're talking about people's participatory democracy. And if that is something that a government that is there to serve the people believe in, it would understand that when you pass laws not for yourself, you pass laws for the country. And therefore you want to do as best as possible to ensure at the end of the passing of those laws, it is in the best interest of the country and is in conformity with our constitution. So therefore the people must have a say, they must see it, and they must sanction it so we can get something very, widely supported by the majority of the people here to ensure that we have a law, sustainable law, that will guide the country and its electoral process going forward. Then McKenzie made the point about the eyes have it. And the unfortunate thing is these eyes never see anything good, anything serious. Their ears do hear what is right. They do not have the intention of representing their constituents in the country well, but they're in Parliament, they talk and they vote, the eyes have it. And at the end of the day, it's chaos. And it's so heartbroken when you have a leader and you have a government that operates and like to exist in confusion. Because this thing about the timeline, to say you go to Parliament within a couple of days without giving sufficient time to make public what you have produce in terms of the law to engage other persons who may not be in agreement with you, because in a society there are those for and those against. And those for and those against have the right to coexist. And therefore, those who are for, yes, they will have their say, and those who are against will have their say too. And once the say is reasonable say in the interest of the country, then that's where we go as a country. So you have what you have, peace, and you have order, and things will transition quite well in the interest of the country and our democracy. Now, when you have a leader who deliberately tried to bring a law to Parliament, see what they talk about the reform that they were bringing before, a law that says, if they bring you here from abroad to vote, and when you come here, you listen to the discussion, and you felt, well, who brought you here to vote? And not making sense to what you understand a government should be governing for, and you decide that you change your mind and vote for somebody else, then you commit an offense. And a prime minister and a government will take that to Parliament and call that reform. You have to be a crazy person. Who would go to consultation to discuss with people a serious thing like electoral reform? And in the Severin's report, they would talk about the question of campaign finance reform. And the leader of government understanding of that part of that report, that the opposition lazy and they want money from the treasury to campaign. And you as a leader, in what country a leader who doesn't have the understanding or the ability, or if you allow yourself to be infested by mischief, to go to consultation and make those remarks and so forth? It tells you that we're operating with somebody who really thinks, and I call him made the point earlier on, that the country was willed to him, and then he can do as he pleases with the rest of us. I mean, I grow here, born and grow here, I serve in government, and every prime minister beside this one have engaged. And whether you're happy or not, even, Patrick John, when in the days of the CSA and the government were having rough times, he engaged Charles Severin at meetings and discussed the business of the public servants. Okay? I remember the last time there was a discussion about when there was an issue between Earl Williams and Reuben Blackmore, when they had an issue in Campbell, some disaster in Campbell. And then at the time, the bishop at the time who was here, Mazin, facilitated a meeting between the government and the opposition and so forth. We made a request, and the release that was read earlier on made reference to that, to the prime minister to meet, because we as citizens are in this thing not because we have something we want out of it. We could easily just join the government and say, to hell with it, and live how they say it, cheap and sweet. But no, it's our country, and we have to exist in our country, and we want what is right for the country. And our idea was to engage with the government, led by the prime minister, discuss, see what is there, discuss, and make recommendation so that we can end up with this thing in a very united way. So we have a united front going forward on reform. The prime minister said he accepts to meet us, and he'll give a date. That was since in February of this year. Where we are now in April, and we haven't heard from the prime minister. What game is that being played? Okay, we're expecting to hear that the Electoral Commission will call us because we request a meeting with them. Thankfully, the president have agreed. We will have a meeting with an audience with her on the 22nd of April, and so on. So we want to engage and discuss and arrive at what is good for the country. Because at the end of the day, government comes, government goes, but the country and its people remain, and the electoral law. Ronald spoke about the radio, Freedom on the national radio station. The last election in St. Kitts, the manager of the national radio station, ZDK, came on the air and said that each of the parties had equal rights on the radio station. And then if you want additional opportunities, you pay for it. What is wrong with that? Do we exist in a little calabash or in a barrel that we see things differently, we behave differently, and so forth? And we're talking reform for more than 50 years. And we cannot get the reform that will serve the needs of the country. And we're saying, having stayed that long, it would be a shame for us to end up with a reform that creates more confusion. We want a reform that is comprehensive, that will serve the need of the people and ensure our democracy is intact. I mean, if you are so good, you are so perfect, you are doing all of these things, why are you afraid of reform? There is something that's not having reform that you're getting from, and you feel you should hang on to that, and so forth. And so I feel we as the ERC, we're doing our very best to move the process forward in a very professional and civilized manner. We're having this meeting this week on Thursday where all the stakeholders will come together to discuss the next move. And I want to thank the members of the ERC from the various political parties, religious groups, individuals and civil society groups who have come together so we can create this partnership of our people to work together for the good of Dominica. And I want to appeal to Dominicans at home and abroad. Give us the support that is necessary so we can move this process forward, because it is important that Dominica gets the reform that will suit every Dominican, whether you live here or you live overseas. Mr. G, thank you.
Yes, so also thank you for that. Now, we know a lot of those things. We've discussed some of those things tonight. They've been discussed many times before. And I can see that the ERC, the organizations involved agree on certain things. There are many things in common in terms of the legislation, what they want to see there. Here's what, and I'm hoping that your next meeting coming up will deal with that, because the reality is, as one person, I just want to refer to one comment made by somebody on Facebook. The Prime Minister noticed the weaknesses in the opposition, the political parties and the groups, that they are not able to bring people out in the streets in massive numbers to cause him and his party panic. So he's doing as he pleases. So the question I have, and that is what I've been getting to, that wherever you meet next, you're going to have to find a way to demonstrate to this government, because if they bring legislation that is not palatable and that you do not believe they should take to Parliament, you have to find a way to let the government know that this is not okay, and you have to be able to win the hearts and minds of the people, that they can come out and support you to ensure that that legislation, we don't know what is going to be in the legislation, but if it turns out that the legislation is very deeply flawed, and in fact will only serve to preserve the winning legacy of the Prime Minister, it seems to me that the ER should then have to send out a very, very strong message to government. And I cannot think of a stronger message than bringing people out in large numbers to let the government know, because, you know, political parties like to win elections. That's what they're made for. And if you see a majority of people on the street against you, you're not going to go to the Parliament and pass election, because you know whether you pass or not, they will vote you out of office. So it seems to me the next thing, and I agree with the person who's making the comment, has to be to win the hearts and minds of the people so that they can come out there. Let me just open it up to everybody. Gentlemen, anybody, you can just jump in now and let's make your country and get the discussion going. Forget about me. Let's just talk to each other and think about our audience and our people on Facebook. Let's have a discussion. Who wants to go first?
Well, let me start. And
Yeah,
say,
Okay, Washby, you want to say something?
Yeah, well, you know, just to echo and to strengthen.
Let's try to be brief so that we can get everybody a chance the remaining time we have. Yes, Washby, go right ahead.
I can go ahead? Yeah. Well, I want to support generally all the comments that have been made, some very good comments and presentations. But I want us to recognize, in moving forward, we need to really look at where we are now. And primarily, having regard to the sham elections, what we have in place is a sham government. And what we are recognizing is that the government in itself, being aware that they are sham government, you see they are entrenching themselves more in terms of their dictatorial rule and their dictatorship. And as I said, the government is trying to get more entrench itself in terms of power and governance. But the downside of all of that, already mentioned the dictatorial attitude, but we are seeing a lot of mismanagement in government, bad governance, and even our political system on a whole seem to be threatened by what is happening. But in moving forward and having regard, I believe personally that as a result of the ERC's work and the political parties or the civil society organizations and so forth, the government is really on their heels. They're running. And this is why the Prime Minister has taken the position he took recently with regards to saying, well, I will give all you something, but I hope when all you get it, all you take what all you want. I mean, you can see that this is really not in keeping or not along the lines that the ERC has maintained. The ERC have tried all civilized, all amicable, democratic measures and means and processes to deal with this election reform process. And the government is not in tune and is not responding to that kind of process. And so therefore, we have to become more serious. We understand clearly that the electoral reform is very fundamental and is a foundation, a bedrock for our democracy, for free and fair election, to have a level playing field. But the government in itself now, it's not going along those lines because they have ulterior motives. They are benefiting from the bad governance, from the mismanagement, from the bad financial performance, bad economic performance. So they would prefer the bad justice system. I mean, all the institutions, as you can see, the police, the civil service, there are problems and tensions in all these areas.
So
the country is really decaying. So
yes,
therefore,
yes, right.
Yeah, so therefore, we can only continue to move in partnership and unity to be more effective. Yes, the public has to be mobilized, educated, but maybe at some point in time, the actions will have to be heightened or strengthened in terms of more civil disobedience and activities like that can really make the government be answerable to the democratic process of the people. I just want to end on the fact of the economic terrorism raised by Vital.
Yeah, but here's what I'm saying, Washby. Here's what I'm saying. We're just having a round robin discussion now. The point is, we know all of those things. We know all about the economic terrorism. We know about all these setbacks. We have a situation now where draft legislation is going to be circulated. If everything is perfect and we're happy about it, then we'll just say congratulations to the government and let's go with it. But if it is flawed, I think it is very important, as one of the people on Facebook said, that the opposition forces win the hearts and the minds of the people whom they have been educating for so long now, who really now should be knowledgeable about what you've been saying. The next thing I think is to win the hearts and the minds of the people. So if the legislation is flawed, you can take it to the people and say, we need to go out and stand for our rights and make sure we get the right stuff. Anybody want to take it from there?
Yes, I wanted to just say, and I too agree, definitely, we have to win the hearts of the minds of the people, and that's key. And in doing so, and that's what the meeting is on Friday, we have to begin to plan the right strategies, the effective strategies. We're going to sit and do that. And as I was saying before, we have already started. We have already started with the CSA event ERC held, with the event on the Ark, with the Grand Bay event, and more of that has to happen, and we will discuss that further. But I just want to say we are not advocating violence, as Ronald Charles has said. But that also means that we must be in it for the long haul. And when I say long haul, I don't mean we do nothing and we go slow. We prepared for the long haul, but taking urgent and important actions as we go along. All of that strategy will begin to form up in the next. I mean, we have ideas in mind, but we have to bring people together and discuss it. But I want to raise an important point, and it's important for people to note. If we allow this government to do reforms in a way that suit them, to bastardize the residential criteria, the residency criteria, and other things, I want to say to the people that it will not be possible after that to vote them out using the normal process. I want to make it very clear, McKenzie, that's in a sense what you said. It will not be possible after that. So the question is, what are we going to do? How are we going to do for us not to get to that point? And that is what we have to wrap our minds around. And if we get to that point where they actually go to elections, because we're not advocating violence, we have to be ready, and that's what I mean by the long haul, to continue until we get the results. Now, let me tell you what it means in terms of the money. Practical examples of the money. We have been told, and we know by now, 6 billion raised, 4 billion not in the treasury. I did a rough calculation a while ago. If you were to take $500 million out of that and divide it by 5 election cycles would be 25 years. If you were to divide $500 million by 5, you have a 100 million. If they would decide just to use $500 million of the 4 billion that they have set aside for election machinery, that means every election cycle for the next 5 years, 25 years, they can have $100 million EC dollars to spend in the election. Tell me which political party in Dominica, which group in Dominica can overcome that. If it is that these guys can go out and bring people in, tell me whether you can overcome that simply by playing going by the ballots to try to get them out. If they bastardize the whole process, you can't. Now, even if you were to say they will not use 100 million, they'll use 50 million. It means for the next 50 years. So what I'm saying to the people, let's understand that if we want a better Dominica for our children, for our future, we have to do what it takes now to prevent the government or to encourage the government or prevent them from going to parliament with this, everything that's morally right, or we have to be willing to continue, because we're not advocating violence, we have to be able to continue to ensure that this government gets out of office, that they resign, that something happens, that they are out of office, because it will not be possible if they pass their favorable elections reforms to vote them out simply by the ballots. I just want to make that point.
I get what Kent is saying.
Bernard, go right ahead.
I guess what Kent is saying, but I shared a slightly different view on that. I'm not that pessimistic at all. If you look at the election results, that this government has been spending millions of dollars in these elections, and they're still winning constituencies by 50 votes, 100 votes, 200 votes, maybe rarely. And so this thing is winnable. Even after millions of dollars being spent by this government, we are still have close elections in every constituency. So I believe that what we need to focus our time and energy on, if I'm to be brutally honest, is electoral reform that we do. We put our efforts into understanding who should be on that list and who should not be on that list. We should put our efforts into analytics and knowledge and technology to understand who needs to be registered in each constituency, who doesn't need to be registered, and who we can get to be registered, who supports who doesn't support who, and to put all our efforts into overcoming not $100 million, but 100 votes. To put in the money into overcoming not $50,000, but 50 votes. That is what we're talking about. And I believe that if you can spend that amount of money and still only win by 50 votes here, 10 votes there, 15 votes there, then that thing that we can do can work. So I don't want to paint this dire picture that says, well, with all this money there, we cannot win. No, we can win. And what we have to do to win is to outthink Roosevelt Scary. That is what we must do. We must be more intelligent. We must be more strategic. We must be smarter in our use of technology. We must use our brains. They have the money, but we can use our brains, our innovations, and our abilities to win and put this government out of office, because this government will never pass electoral reform that is favorable to us. It is banging our heads against the wall. So even ask them to do so. I am fed up with this. I don't want to ask Roosevelt Scary to do anything in Dominica anymore.
Okay,
it is a waste of time to do so. We simply need to put our efforts into replacing this government so that we can do the things that Dominica needs. Do not ask Roosevelt Scary to do anything anymore, my friends. It's a waste of time to do so.
Bernard, let's agree that makes a lot of sense. Gentlemen, let me hear your views on this. What Bernard is saying is no point in asking this government to do anything. They're not going to do anything which is against their winning legacy.
Mr. G, we have a call.
Yes, you can take a call.
Hello, good evening.
Hi, good evening. How you doing, Bossa?
We're doing fine, and how are you?
I'm good, man. I'm good. Can I go ahead?
Yeah, go right ahead. Sure.
Okay. I've been listening to the conversation for a little bit. Once I got home, I heard when Mr. Severin spoke, and from there on, I heard. But I just heard Sheridan say something a while ago that a caller or someone on Facebook said that the opposition witnessed the Prime Minister recognizes that. I would like to rephrase that. I don't think it's the weakness of the opposition. I think it's the lack of information or the lack of participation on the populace. Because I hear the opposition on Q all the time. I hear you, Bosso. I hear Mr. G with the Tuesday night show. I hear Mr. Lincoln. I hear Thompson. I hear everybody speaking out. Everyone on the panel, George, Charles, everybody. And it's not because of the weakness of the opposition. It's the populace. The people are not informed and not engaged in the civic duty. Or some people are just afraid. You see, and these are the things that is killing the country by where we are now. Now, let me go into what I really called to say. I've heard everything that was discussed tonight, and I want to make a statement, and it's based on observation. Gentlemen, everyone who spoke tonight, points were very strong. But there is one problem we have there. Mr. George, most of all, mentioned the amendment to the Constitution. And I don't think Skerritt wants an amendment to the Constitution. He literally made a statement last week or week before concerning that when he was trashing Mr. Byron's finished product, because he was highly involved in what Byron framed for him. But now he don't like certain things. And he want this done, he want that and whatnot. That's when he said he's going to just rush it through and shove it down the people's throat. And here is the problem. The intent of this guy to do whatever he wants by any means necessary, because he has gotten away with it for the last 20-something years. Okay? And now, guys, you all are talking about it. You all have to really organize and be prepared for what's about to take place, because he has no intention on changing his ways. They say the leopard don't change his spot. He's going to do whatever he can in his power to take this thing to Parliament and have it passed like he wanted, because you say you want it, okay, I'm going to shove it down.
Let me ask you something quickly, Colin. What do you think is the most important thing that the opposition can do that is within its power now? The opposition forces can do to get the attention of the government by winning the hearts and minds of the people, to get them out there to get a strong message out of the government that there is serious opposition to what they're doing? What advice do you have to the opposition forces to go about doing this?
Severin, my thing I've always said, take the message to the people in every village, in every hamlet, and let the people understand, because there are many people who have heard these things spoken of many times, and they just sit back and say nothing and do nothing, because some folks are scared. Some folks really expect the opposition to pay them. I should not have to pay you to do your civic duty, your duty to country. It's a problem that we have in Dominica. If you look at many other countries, I'm going to use America as an example. The patriotic fever in America is very, very strong, very high. And the people take their civic duty seriously. They take it all the way down to end up in a war, a riot, or whatever. I'm not saying anything that what they should do as far as the violence. But there come a time there means anything necessary and any means necessary. But in Dominica's case, the people are too lackadaisical, and they have gotten to the mendicant stage where that every time somebody call you out, they have to give you something. They have to buy you something. They have to give you a civil, because Roosevelt Scarrett has done that for the last 15, 20 years. And the people have gotten to the point where every time some come out is a handout, like a beggar's mentality. We must change that way of thinking and think of the country first and do what is necessary to change the country's trajectory, because if it goes through, when they do this electoral reform, if it goes through, you could kiss the opposition and any other system goodbye. It will only be a storm of rain on your back all day, all night. Let me say this. I heard a couple brothers this past week. I think last week and today I heard them, or yesterday, and they are being subject to the same thing that the non-labor rights are being subject to. And these guys made a statement that the grandmama, the mama, and everybody, and people like them have taken for granted the freedom and democratic system, and they join a wicked and evil system like that. And now it's coming back to haunt everybody, because one of the gentlemen mentioned that he even came down to vote. So what I'm saying, that is not an opposition issue. It's a Dominican issue. It lacks the love for country and the fervor to do what is right and what is necessary, and stop looking for handouts.
Thank you very much.
Move forward. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yes. Thanks a lot for that.
Mr. G.
Go ahead.
Yes. Go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to comment on the issue of winning the hearts and minds. We must never forget that the incumbents have been on a journey of electoral capture for the last 15, 20, 25 years. So they too have been propagating issues of dependency. They have been selling a different record for a long time. So you cannot,
and they're going to continue doing that.
And they're going to continue doing that.
So
and
what,
you cannot,
so what are you going to do? That's what I'm asking.
Right. And you cannot. So what I'm saying is, the same issues that we are advocating for as we speak, access to the radio stations, for example, I can guarantee you that if the DBS board now would say, okay, yes, there is no electoral reform, or it hasn't gone on board yet, but I'm going to invite all the opposition forces, and I'm going to give you 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 slots a week.
Do you think
this is where you will start?
Do you think they will do that, Ronald?
No, that's what I'm saying. So I'm going back to the point.
You remember a guy called Michael Douglas?
Very much so.
He said something about espoir mal papai. You don't want to be accused of that.
I agree.
Right.
But what I'm saying is, yes, we have to get out there. Yes, we have to do the work. Obviously, you have to. But we have to understand, too, that there is a lot of forces against us. in terms of, think about this. You go to a gentleman now in a house, bread and butter issue, and you're trying to convince him about something, and somebody has come and they give him $200-300. You would have to spend more time with him in order that you can convince him.
That is very true. Very true.
So our methodology must take our circumstances into play before we believe it's just going on the ground and doing this. I've always had an issue with, yes, you can win the minds and soul of people who understands who understand the circumstances they're in. And to do that is a social reconstruction. All right. And that takes money, that takes time, that takes effort. And in order that we can do this is collaboration. Those who have the money put it, those who have the time go on the field. So it's a collaborative effort that we must embrace in order that we can bring the change that we talk about. Because if myself, have to go on the field and spend 7 days on the field, right? Those who speak about winning the hearts and soul have to say, how are we going to support this man to change the hearts and soul?
Yeah, but Ronald, I thought the collaboration, I see the collaboration right here.
No, I'm saying that is what we need to do, exactly what we're doing there.
So you're
and
doing
it has to come from across the field. It has to be everybody on deck. And I believe with that human effort,
I agree.
Dominica will be a different place, and we cannot underestimate the power of collective.
I agree, Ronald, but it will not take $50 million, not $100 million to do what you're talking about. That is the point that I am trying to make to us. When you get,
I think you're right, and I think you're right, Bernard. It will not take 50 million. It can be done.
Now we're close. We can do this. This is guerrilla warfare. We can do this with intelligence, with strategy. Yes, it will take some money. It will take nowhere close to the kind of money that Roosevelt started spending on the elections, and we can raise the money that we need to do.
Yes, let's go ahead, Serge.
Yep. Well, I think we have to look at the reality of the situation as it is on the ground. We have a situation where we have a government that is in office for 25 years. And when we compare Dominica to the rest of the region, we are last. And I mean, Reginald Ostry said it, Dominica is last kakarot in everything. And really, sometimes it really hurts my heart when you travel to the other countries to see how far back we are in terms of the development and even in terms of basic electoral laws. Dominica is the only Caribbean country in 2024, the first 2.5 decades of the 21st century, that is still struggling for basic electoral reform to bring our electoral laws up to standard. And we have a government that is in power for 25 years. The entire government machinery is falling apart. I mean, right now, nothing is working well in Dominica with the government machinery. All the government institutions are plagued with incompetence. You cannot go to the registry and get things done. You cannot go to physical planning and get things done. You cannot go. Where can you go with the government machinery and get anything done like in a real country? And this is because of what we have inherited from the lack of proper electoral system and electoral laws.
So how are the opposition forces?
What has to be done, Mr. G?
Hold on. How are the opposition forces going to take advantage of that reality? Because that reality talking about is what is confronting every single Dominican.
No, well, this is what I was actually coming to. That you walk on the streets of Dominica today and you ask, and nobody is supporting the government. You know, people are right now, you're getting a situation where people are afraid or ashamed to say they support the government when you walk the streets. To me, everybody's saying that everybody has something to cry about, even die-hard labor rights. So there is a high level of dissatisfaction. But what has actually happened is that the Labour Party over the last few years have taken advantage of the ignorance and the vulnerability of the people. And I mean, all due respect to you, Mr. G and Q95, this is the only medium where this type of discussion is taking place. But when you go to the airport, as soon as you reach Bells, you lose signal from Q. You know, you go into the south. As soon as you go up to Monakuma before Jungle Bay, you lose Q. So they know exactly what they are doing in getting people the propaganda on DBS radio and the other radio stations. And the information that is supposed to be getting to them is not getting to them. And this is where the responsibility of the opposition forces come in. That you have right now to take. There are some people who consider themselves opposition, because we saw them in the last sham elections. Although the opposition boycotted, how many we got over? How many? 30 candidates as independents, which means there are a lot of people who have political aspirations. People who are looking and waiting to see if they can also get into office. And these people, I would like to call on them to join the forces in the constituencies, in the villages, to start doing the work to mobilize people to understand what is taking place in the country.
So, what is preventing the opposition forces from doing exactly that, to invite those people and embrace them, bring them into the fold?
Look, watch me. I am just an individual.
Just another point. Just another point, McKenzie.
Let me only finish my point, watch me. Let me finish my line of thought.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to take.
Let me only finish my point, please.
Okay, fine.
Thanks, yeah. I am saying that the conditions in the country right now has never been more favorable for a change of government than as it is now.
Clearly.
An economy that is failing, all sectors that are failing, institutions that are failing. Everything in the country is failing because of bad governance. You have parliamentarians who are parliamentarians and who are paid, and they're even ashamed to show themselves. I mean, who is the minister of, you call a ministry and tell me who is the minister. You don't even know who are the ministers these days, because one man is ruling the nation. And even the parliamentarians and the government ministers in cabinet do not know what they're about. And this is why, even after making so many promises that this is his last year and this is his last year, and this is his last year, he cannot find a successor because he trusts nobody. And this is where the opposition have to get their acts together. And electoral reform is not the end. It is beyond the electoral reform. How prepared are the political parties getting to take the realms of power, to get candidates who can contest an election and win an election, and all the things that have to take place? And how much are we going to fight? Because, I mean, I will totally disagree with Bernard Ito that money maybe is not all, but money has a lot to do, because the Labour Party machinery knows exactly how many votes they have to bring in and buy and bribe and thing to win an election. So they know, for example, in this constituency, they only need to win by 2 votes. So don't fool yourself. They know it because they have the whole thing well calculated. Yeah. And this is where the political parties have to get down on the ground, get into the constituencies, identify candidates. I mean, who are the candidates for the political parties going up for the next election?
So this is where we come into what it's exactly that the opposition forces need to do now, because there is an opportunity, obviously, and everybody's seeing that, because as I said earlier, every Dominican is feeling that terrible pinch, the painful pinch in their pocket. All right, so people are seeing that. Washby, you wanted to You want to add something there? You're muted.
Yeah, well, the point I wanted McKenzie to bear in mind as well, since he was talking about information and so on, there's a very critical and sensitive development that we have to take note of, you know. The Prime Minister reported in his 10-point agreements in China that there are 2 agreements dealing with information and the China news agency and so on. You know, we have to be very careful there. You know, this China news, China is not Dominica where news just go out. You know, my brother. When you bring in the Chinese news agency to partner with your GIS and so forth, my brother, you know what the realm of propaganda situation we're really going into?
No, that is
so we have to be very careful. We mentioned about Russia, but it's very critical that we look at that development regarding China and news propaganda.
No, I agree. That is something
I just wanted to bring that.
We have a couple calls.
Yes, good point. We'll take the call, boss. I just want to make sure that the opposition focus on what they can do, not what the other people are doing. Yes, boss, go ahead.
Yes, good evening.
Yes, good evening. Go ahead, right ahead.
Yes, good evening to the entire panel. This is Earl Bruno here. I just heard my president from CCM speaking. But I just want to differ on a point in which Brother McKenzie alluded to with respect to the candidates and the Labour Party planning to, they have at the back of their mind that they can win by 2 votes. So in a crisis where we are in Dominica at this point in time, when we watch the movement, the system in which that government operates against the people of Dominica, and you're hearing people crying and calling Suku Maui Joseph all about Dominica you pass. And even the very same people that used to be so, rough that was supporting him, you're hearing them bawling and telling you it's time for something different. So you're telling me at this point in time, the people of Dominica will take their good heart, their good business, their good conscience, their livelihood, the food on their table that they are unable to even put on their table at this point in time, and tell me that government will ever win another election, whether we get electoral reform or not. Yes, the electoral reform is important for our level playing field for any party in the future to have an opportunity to govern. But come on, in the condition in which Dominica is suffering, we're supposed to walk into victory, recovery, and rescue and take back our country. Hands off, hands down. Thank you. Good evening. God bless.
Thank
you very much.
Thank you for that. I suspect you'll have to do quite a bit of work, notwithstanding all of that, because you know that's what politics is all about. Politics is local. Go ahead, Bosso.
Hello, good evening.
Hi, good evening.
Yes, go right ahead.
I'm going to tell you exactly after we watch for a while at the opposition forces. You know what the problem is? The opposition forces are concentrating too much on what Kerry is doing and not what they have to do to win the votes of the people. That is the problem. Yes, we are all seeing what Kerry doing, so we don't need to tell us. What you all need to do is get your act together, get your candidates, and start concentrating on the people of the island, because that is what you need to do. We don't need to hear about security. We see it all right. Concentrate on building out your party. Concentrate on getting the members, the candidates. Are you all ready? It's curriculum slap to me. Are you ready? That is the question.
Yes.
No. So all you need to stop talking about Kerry doing that. Because Kerry alone is one man. Kerry, all you're trying to break down is Kerry. If you cannot break down Kerry, what is going to happen? How many years are you attacking? One person, Kerry. Nothing is happening. So what you think? Change strategy. I'm not sure what rising the opposition or the forces.
Yeah.
But you all need to stop talking about Kerry. That is what I'm telling you. I'm on the ground. Stop discuss what security is doing and start to see what you all are doing. Start getting your act together with your candidate and start putting work into action. That is all.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Yes.
But
any other
if I were to make, sorry, a quick response to that caller.
No other call there. No other call there.
Somebody wanted to give a response to the caller?
Yes, because it's important, obviously, for political parties to do what they need to do. And I don't know specifically what each political party is doing, but I'm pretty sure that the political parties are very, very mindful on that. But when we talk about electoral reform, I personally am not interested in Skerrit. I'm interested in electoral reform. So are you suggesting that we should not talk about electoral reform, that we should not want there to be free and fair election? Or is that a comment to distract people into thinking that it's about Skerrit? Because for me, it's not about Skerrit. All I pray for Skerrit is that he repent and he turn to God.
No, but Kent, I think what I heard the caller saying is that for you to form the government, you have to win 11 seats.
Yeah,
No,
let me support that.
I understand that, but what I'm saying is that what we're talking about is electoral reform and the importance of electoral reform.
Yeah, but Severin was saying, even if you get electoral reform, after you get that, you have to win 11 seats to form a government. I think that is what Severin was saying, beyond electoral reform. So it means that even with electoral reform, every party is still going to have to go on the ground, do its work to win 11 seats to form a government. That's what I think.
And the caller made a very important point, which is something that supports my own thinking on this, and I don't want it to be lost in the conversation. The caller made a point which illustrates something that we should know by now. The caller said, we know about Skerrit, we know about his wrongdoings, we know about his stealing, we know everything about it. And that is a crucial point. I think as the opposition, we have already filled that barrel that said Skerrit is no good, bad governance, and all of those things. Listen, the Dominican people are smarter than we think. They have more common sense than you think. They know that. We don't need to fill that barrel up anymore. We don't need to be banging Skerrit anymore. We don't need to fill that barrel up anymore. It is filled. It is obvious. The Dominican people know it. Almost every Dominican knows it. If you ask them, frankly, they'll say, yeah, Skerrit is not who we need if we're going to go forward as a country. We fill that barrel up. So we need to change strategies and go fill the other barrels up. Build, as we have said, as the caller said, our constituency machinery of appeal as candidates, of strategies of who we are, what we do, what we bring to the table, and why we are the right people to replace this government, and we are capable and competent to go forward with this government. That is what the Dominican people need to know, They don't need to know nothing more about what Skerrit. I don't want to talk about Skerrit no more. They know the character of the man. He's not reasonable. We talk sometimes like we're talking to a reasonable guy who will rationalize, think through things and say, yeah, I do this, I will do that. No, the man does not care about our opinion, let's be honest. Skerrit believes he can do anything he wants in this country. He's got the political capital to do so. So we have to shift the conversation. We're fundamentally on electoral reform and in politics generally. Let us let Skerrit be. That barrel is full. All Dominicans sit. And the caller just made the point. She said, I'm on the ground. Let me tell you, we know who Skerrit is. And let us not forget that point.
All right.
Let's go over work on the other things.
Good stuff. Nicholas, George, before we wind up, I wanted to get your further views on some of this. Because I think it's important to listen to the callers and listen to the discussion about, yes, we're talking electoral reform, but Severin made the point. Obviously, the opposition forces have to get together. I'm sure when your next meeting, you look at that and work out strategies. We now answer the minds of the people to be able to demonstrate to the government that you have support and they have to listen to you and to make the changes that you want made in the draft laws that they want to place before the parliament. But Severin McKenzie is making a point, even beyond that, it is clear that the opposition forces are going to have to work out strategies together to win 11 seats to form a government. Your thoughts, Nicholas?
I agree with that entirely. You win, you have the electoral reform legislation passed in Parliament. You still have to go on the ground and campaign. And win the hearts and minds on the ground and to win the constituencies, at least 11 of them to form the government. And that cannot be disputed. And I agree with the caller as well. that I mean, if the caller is saying this is what they're sensing on the ground, we ought not to be discarding the comment of a caller. That may be one caller who is echoing the view of 100 people. Okay, so as far as the United Workers Party is concerned, it has done work. It continues to do work, and will continue to do work as far as fortifying its position on the ground. But I still don't want anybody to lose sight of the fact that electoral reform plays a critical role in whatever we do. So it cannot be sidestepped. It cannot be sidestepped. When we boycotted the election in 2022, I'm of the view that the Prime Minister gave us Salisbury and Marigot, you know. A lot of people are criticizing the United Workers' Party for not participating in the election. This is the view that the persons hold. I do not agree with it. The United Workers' Party has been following the rule of law. It has been saying all along that we are a rule of law party. And we've taken the matters against the government to court consistently. And the last one, we got a judgment from the Caribbean Court of Justice that says Dominica should not go into another election with the taints that they saw or similar taints in an electoral process. And then you are asking us now, on the 6th of December, and that's 6 months after the CCJ had said that, let's go into an election because the taints, it doesn't trouble us. No, that is why we went to the court to ask for an opinion of the court. So we're either going to respect the court, so we're not going to respect the courts. So I agree, I tend to agree with Mr. Ito, you know, that the barrel is full with the things that we want to say about the Prime Minister, and that we need, however, the Prime Minister is not a figment of our imagination. He exists. He exists, and the Prime Minister about 2 weeks ago threatened us in an electoral process. That's what it is, essentially inherent. I am saying I felt threatened when the Prime Minister said, in essence, that I'm going to take electoral reform legislation to Parliament despite the views of anybody else. And I will not tolerate any nonsense, any foolishness in my way to take it to Parliament. That's a threat. That's a threat coming from the leader of government in a country. So yes, I have to go to Jubla Biersch. In my case, I have to go to Jubla Biersch and Colio and win hearts and minds, and I have to support Mr. Ronald Charles in the Valley and Mr. Linton in Marigot and Hector John in Salisbury and Marcus Romain in Capuchin, Teacher Seeker, Rosanna Emmanuel, Teacher Ernie, and so on. I have to support all of them. I have to go in each of their constituencies and support them. Dr. Thompson Fontaine in Grand Fond. We have to do that. But the present danger that we feel we face now, and I don't want us to lose that point. The present danger that we face now is what the Prime Minister has said. And I think he's saying it against the backdrop of an analysis he may have made. That when he went into Parliament in 2017, 2018, with legislation to legalize bribery, he found opposition and he withdrew it. In May 29, 1979, there was opposition to legislation brought before Parliament. And on the eve of that, the Prime Minister said in 2 weeks, Friday this week or Monday next week at 4 o'clock, we will give you legislation. That legislation, we're going to send it to the Electoral Commission. The Electoral Commission will concentrate on that. Let us understand, you know, the Electoral Commission is already quoted by Sir Dennis Byron as having given consensus. So when they get the legislation and it is enhanced, it wouldn't take them, it would just take them one meeting to send it back. It is the Prime Minister's Electoral Commission in terms of majority decision. I am saying that with the time frame that the Prime Minister is laid out is unreasonable. It does not embrace consensus, and he ought to give us the legislation and then let us work on a time frame. All right? He can come with supplementary estimate to get the additional money he wants for the commission. He's done that repeatedly. So who says he must pass the legislation now and go to Parliament and in the budget? If he is going to give budgetary support to the enforcement of the legislation now, it means he has an estimate as to how much money he must give the commission. He knows that.
So Nicholas George, I think the issue here is, as we said, we went through that before, and I think the groups are going to have a meeting soon. So all of what is being discussed here tonight, of course, is material that the group will have at its disposal to consider all of what you're saying and Bernard and everybody has said. It seems to me then the group going to have to take a decision to find a way to get the support it needs to get in case that kind of flawed legislation is what is given. There is not enough time to do the necessary corrections to it so that it can go back to the government to review. It seems to me that the group will have to decide what action is going to take to ensure that it stops that from happening.
The group will take that decision. The group will take that decision, and you've said it well, you know. And Mr. McKenzie, you said it well. If the legislation, I think Mr. Ito himself said it, if the legislation, when he gives it to us, we only have to dot one T or cross a T and dot an I and something, and it is all right, then fine, go ahead. What we're saying is allow us to see it, read through it, and if there are areas of contention in it, we're not going to rehash the past. These are the areas of contention, and we're seeking consensus in taking it forward so that when it goes to Parliament, there will be no issue about you, for that matter, unless if they go to Parliament and deceive us. But when it goes to Parliament, your expectation is that a Prime Minister who would have given his word, the head of Parliament, would not go to Parliament and deceive the population on the word that he's given. Although we know that he's taken liberties with the truth in the past, he's likely to do it again. But so we have to do what you're saying there. We have to engage the public, the citizenry of Dominica. We have to put our candidates, we have to select our candidates to contest elections that are coming up. We have to plan to be in emergency mode to be the next government. So we have to do those things. And we have to let the Prime Minister know that he, as head of government, the Prime Minister should be dismissed now, you know, really. To threaten, I don't know if I am overemphasizing that.
No, you're not overemphasizing that.
Not, you know, because
no, you're not.
This is a threat. And there's no other, well, we have an attorney there, he probably will have a different definition because this Prime Minister might come to him for legal representation. And therefore, he might have a different interpretation. I don't have this hangers on. I don't have these constraints on me. In my simple understanding of what the Prime Minister said, it's a threat. And I am saying to him, Mr. Prime Minister, what is your threshold to deal with that threat?
No, but Nicholas, there are a number of lawyers in the opposition forces. I mean, one of them might consider looking at that.
Yeah. So yes, let us do what Mr. Severin says. The selection of candidates. Mr. Charles spoke to the question of collaboration. You said we're doing it now. Mr. Hurtault mentioned that on Thursday we are meeting face to face. All right, face to face. We are meeting with all the groups, and then we will address what we have addressed now, and some of the things that we have not addressed. And Mr. Ito, I support the language that you're using. I have heard it before. Let us stop calling, and I'm going to probably start tonight. Stop calling the name. Stop calling the name. You know, you might say Prime Minister, But just stop calling his name. Every time you call his name, you're publicizing him, you're giving him strength.
Yeah, here what I would say as we close. I don't know if there's any other more remarks that anyone wants to make, but I would think what I can say is this, that the people of Dominica who are listening tonight at home and abroad in the region and globally are hearing what this group is saying. And I get a sense it is coming through that this is a cohesive group that is working together to bring about the necessary change, to get the electoral reforms done in a right way, willing to work out a strategy to mobilize the support to ensure that flawed legislation does not go to Parliament, and is also indicating that beyond the electoral reform, even if you get the reforms that you want, it seems to me there has to be collaboration in order to unify all of the forces, all of the strengths, and to be able to win 11 seats as a minimum to form a government. I think this is what the people will listen, hearing, and they want to know next. So they'll be looking forward to seeing what it is next that the Electoral Reform Coalition Group is going to do to win their hearts and minds so that they can come out and support whatever initiative that is taken, whether it's to ensure you get the reforms that you need, or whether you have to stand up if the government decides that we're going to go to Parliament, like you said, the Prime Minister indicated that he'll go no matter what. The group and the people who support it would have to send a clear message to the government, I believe, to say this is a democracy, and we the people are saying that we don't want you to go to Parliament with that. We're asking you to withdraw it and come back to the table and listen to us. But it seems to me that the opposition forces are going to have to win the hearts and minds of the people in order to get them to come out and stand up with them and to make that statement to the government. Any other thoughts from anybody on this?
Mr. G.
Yeah, well, yeah, I just wanted to say that apart from the threat issued by the Prime Minister, it's also clear that what we're going to get is a piecemeal approach to electoral reform. We're not going to get the comprehensive electoral reform that we would have anticipated.
He said
and
so. He said so.
Yeah, and what I find is after you have taken all that time, you spend all that amount of money in consultation processes and so on. You have that big delay after your consultations. In fact, we as the ERC and the opposition forces, we have not even received, we are not even aware of what reports were submitted to the government following the consultations, so as that we could have, so that we could be informed of some of the critical recommendations made. We are totally unaware. We made a recommendation as the ERC to have this democratic organization of persons in place to review, and they refused to follow that. And if that was done, we would not be here talking and not knowing. We would have known what is going on in the discussion and what is likely to come out of the legislation.
Yeah, but
I really find after having spent all that funds, the government is really...
Washby, that horse has left the stable. So the only thing you can hope for now is when they put this draft legislation out, the Electoral Reform Coalition Group can now say to the government, we demand, and you ought to be able to stand up for them and say, we demand that this group be put together to review what you have just given to us. And we need enough time to do it so we can come up with whatever amendments are required. Sebs, you were going to say something?
Yes, Mr. G. Or maybe like to quote something from Fidel Castro. When a determined and energetic people sneeze, injustice trembles. And, the pessimism that exists of, we're doing all this fight that we are putting out for electoral reform is almost a futile exercise. I do not believe that. If we are determined enough to fight for it, we can get it. One of the important factors that is missing, and we never touched it, is the fact that what has happened to our youth and the youth factor in this whole thing. I do not believe that the message has actually reached the young people of Dominica so that they can understand the peril that they are in if they do not get an electoral system that is complementary to their destiny. I mean, since the electoral reform process started, quite a number of persons who were on the front line have gone to the great beyond. But these generations to come, if they are not made to understand how their future can be affected, and I mean the young people are already feeling it, because the exodus of young people, young Dominican brains from this nature isle is frightening. So there is a lot of work to be done, and it has to be multifaceted, and it has to be outreaching, and the information has to start getting out in such a way. I think we have to go back to the old days of getting information out. You remember when people, the streets of Roseau used to be laughing with graffiti, Mr. G? And all telephone poles had a flyer. PJ must go, or freedom, or independence, yes, freedom, no. Or even when the UWP won their election in 1995, that they used to have a PA system running the length and breadth of Dominica saying, fear no more. All these forms of communication have actually disappeared. And maybe the political parties, and I call in on the political parties, because they are the ones who are aspiring to replace what exists. They are the ones, because my own experience with politics is not a nice one, because those who fight in the trenches and the thing right now, and when the opportunists come, they are the ones who enjoy
Mr. J,
all the milk and honey.
Yeah. Let's take a call. Let's take a call, boss. Sorry, Sebs. Go ahead, boss.
Hello, good evening.
Yes. Good evening, gentlemen. Yeah, I'm calling from Marigot.
Yeah, sure.
And your audio is very low. Well, that's on the radio. I don't know about people with the
television.
Yeah, with the internet and stuff like that. But on the radio, it's very low. I hope you guys could do something about it.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you.
Welcome. Yes.
Well, gentlemen, I think we've already way over our time. I don't know whether there's any final remarks anyone wanted to make before we just wrap. Any final remarks from anyone?
I would just like to say from the leadership of the United Workers' Party, and of course, I believe I'm expressing the sentiment of the political leader. We have to move forward as a collective force. We have to do this fearlessly, and we have to demand the things that will bring Dominica in a better place. I think Mr. Sev spoke of the issue of the young people. In doing what I do on the ground, I believe now I'm almost convinced that a lot of young people are totally fed up with how the country is being governed, and that is a force for those who are going around and realizing, because young people, I believe, have the foresight and the vision that a lot of people sometimes underestimate them for. So we just have to continue this how I would call it, this fight to bring joy at the end of the day to our people. And I want to take this opportunity and, of course, extend thanks to the host of this program on behalf of the United Workers' Party. Thank you for inviting us. And, of course, the IRC and the work that they're doing will continue to be part and parcel of it. And we're just saying we're moving ahead with getting things done now. Too much talking, and I agree with Mr. Ito If you realize there's certain terminologies I don't use because I call a certain person name a terminology. You know, it's like a terminology. It's no longer a name. So I would prefer to say head of government or something, but I have gone past that long time because we believe this is the way forward. Thank you for the opportunity. And thank you for all your listeners from here and abroad who are going to help us to make this happen. Thank you.
And thank you, gentlemen. If there are no other remarks that are going to come now, here's what I want to say finally, just very quickly on what Ronald just said. It is clear that not just the young people, but many Dominicans, they're feeling a serious pinch, a painful pinch in their pocket right now. And a lot of people are having second thoughts and they're open to listening. But the fact of the matter is, gentlemen, I would like to advise the political parties to bear in mind that sometimes when election time comes and people get $300, they sometimes forget the pain for a little while and they might vote a certain way. So please anticipate that is something that happens in politics. Gentlemen, you have to find a way to get people, win the hearts and men, get to the polls to vote for the opposition forces, regardless of the $300 that will come at election time before polling day. So I just want to say thank you, everybody. And thank you also to the folks who are still with us, those who are not with us and those who are still with us on Facebook and YouTube, and all of the people who called and all those who listened. And thank you, Bosso and Ronald and Bernard and Kent and Sevs and Washby and Nicholas and Bob and I think Rosie was supposed to be with us here tonight, but she couldn't make it. Sorry about that, Rosie. I hope you're feeling better if that's an issue. I just want to say good night to everybody and thanks a lot so much for everybody. And Lambi also thanks to you on showing, although Lambi is not with us tonight, but he's usually there. So we always like to reach out to Lambi. So gentlemen, I just want to wish each of you a pleasant night and I want to wish you a very good luck and good results from your next meeting that is coming up. I hope you'll have a good deliberation, that you'll come out with some good strategies to help you to mobilize people and to win the hearts and minds of Dominicans. Thank you. And let me say good night, a pleasant good night to everybody. Kent, everybody, good night.
Good night, sir.
Good night. Thank you. And thanks to Boss on the console.
Right. Yes.
Thanks a lot. Yes. Great.
Yes. So good night. Good night, everybody.
Good care, everybody. Yeah.
Take care. I'm going to end the meeting now.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. Right.
Of Dominica and the Caribbean came from, understanding our past, embracing our present, charting the way forward into our future, together, eliminating poverty, embracing justice, peace, and togetherness. The Global View on Q, networking Dominica with the rest of the world. The experts are in the house. From Dominica, Canada, the Caribbean, the United States, Europe, Asia, and the rest of the world. Engaging all Dominicans at home and abroad on our agriculture, our economy, our foreign relations, our justice system, our governance, our international competitiveness, our education, our world-class festivals and entertainment, sports, politics, regional cooperation, and much more. Globally positioning Dominica within the Caribbean. Join the conversation on the Global View on Q. Tune in, call us, have your say. The Global View on Q, only on Q95, the big station.